greatest of all teachers and giver of love, hope, faith, and wisdom, look upon your children, the teachers, learners, parents, guardians, and out-of-school youth and adults. We humbly ask for your mercy and forgiveness. Guide us to the right path. May our efforts be blessed with insights and understanding, wisdom and respect for all. Bless us with patience, for the path of learning is never easy. Bless our commitment to keep on learning new knowledge and experiences. Let your light shine upon us as we make our world a better place to live in. Amen.
Magandang araw! April Marcas po, ang inyong pretty ate sa EdTech Unit. Alam ba ninyo na may webinar o online training session ang EdTech Unit tuwing Sabado? Ang araw na ito ay nakalaan para sa ating mga mahal na kaguruan upang turuan sila ng mga bagong kaalaman at kakayahan sa paggamit ng makabagong software at applications para sa pinaka-epektibong paraan at lubos mapagpusay ang kanilang paraan ng pagtuturo. This is also a refresher session for our beloved teachers to enhance their skills in technology. Every Saturday, we will conduct webinar sessions for teachers about the use, advantages, and relevance of different blended learning software applications. Ang webinar seryeng ito ay magsisimula ng alas 9 ng umaga hanggang alas 12 ng tanghali para sa morning session. Magsisimula naman ng alauna at magtatapos ng alas 4 ng hapon ang afternoon session. You can watch us in our DepEd EdTech Unit Facebook page, Educational Technology Unit YouTube channel, DepEd Tayo, and DepEd Philippines. Kita-kits tayo tuwing Sabado!
Cognizant to the needs of our learners, parents, and teachers, the Department of Education provided us with powerful tools for productivity that will allow us to foster critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, communication and collaboration skills to be compassionate, responsible global citizens. Join us and discover new ideas in our series of professional development training program with the ICTS EdTech Unit and Microsoft Education Philippines. Together, we will equip our learners and empower our fellow educators for a dynamic future. Para sa bata, para sa bayan, at para sa guro. Sulong Edukalidad.
An awesome, an amazing morning everyone. Isa na namang mapagpala at napakagandang buhay sa lahat na makakasama namin ngayon mula Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao at kung nasaan man kayo ngayon sa buong mundo. In behalf of DepEd ICTS EdTech Unit, welcome for today's episode of TechTalks for All with our topic, Strengthening Inclusive Education for Everyone and Everywhere. So with that, I would like to greet yung mga viewers natin na kanina pa nakaantabay po. So good morning from Burot Integrated School from Tarlac City po and from East Dagupan City. And of course, sasamahan po ako ng mga napakagandang dilag po from Odantis Technologies. Good morning, Teacher Zari and Teacher Mika.
Good morning po, Teacher Rebelin. Hello po. Ayan. So, para sa kaalaman ng lahat, ito po ang pang-5 beses ko atang na-expose sa TechTalk series na ito. At same pa din po yung kaba talaga na nararamdaman ko every time humaharap ako sa camera at naka-live tayong ganito. Pero ngayon, since pang-5 ko na, Panlima ko na nga tong exposure. Nangingibabaw na po yung excitement ko and I am happy to be here once again with you. So again, magandang Saturday morning po sa lahat. It is me, Teacher Zari. Isang umagang kay lusog na naman tayo ngayong Sabado morning, teachers. And without a doubt, at the end of this session, you viewers, our beloved teachers, we will be able to lakas maka-lesson planning kasi isang pinaghandaang discussion na naman po ang aming i-share sa inyo ngayong umaga. Excuse me po, no? Good morning po kay Teacher Joanne Astucia dyan from Manuel Luis Quezon Elementary School SDOQC at kay Teacher Lina Mehala Maiso. At sabi po niya, happy birthday, Teacher Ruby! Happy birthday daw po, Teacher Rubelin!
Happy birthday!
Thank you po.
Ayan. So, nandito po rin tayo for this morning. Hindi lang po kami ni Miss Ruby din ang makakasama nyo. We have Teacher Mika in the house. So, good morning, Teacher Mika.
Good morning din. Ayan, from speaker to host. Siyempre, all around tayo, diba? Ayan, so good morning po sa inyo lahat. At siyempre, happy birthday po ulit sa nag-iisang si Miss Rubilin. So, marami pong bumabati dyan kay Miss Rubilin sa ating comments. So, patuloy lang po natin siyang batiin. So, from Lina Mehala Mayo, or Maiso, happy birthday daw po, Teacher Ruby. Ayan. So, meron din po tayong mga greetings dito from
Famous
other
pala talaga si
people.
Miss Rubelin, no? Teacher Mika.
Yes, syempre. Feel ko siya yung inaabangan talaga ng mga teachers natin dito. Pag wala si Miss Rubelin, parang medyo sad sila eh. So,
For sure
ayan.
yan.
Oo naman. So, sige, good morning pa tayo sa mga teachers po natin dito or baka may mga students po dito. Pwede rin po kayo mag-good morning dito sa atin. Ayan. So, from Vilma Medillo Malait, good morning po. Watching from Tinabila National High School from Leyte. Oh, layo. From Leyte pa tayo. How about si Miss Zari po? Baka may makikita po kayong mga comments po dyan at Miss Rubilin. Yeah, hanap tayo ng mga comments dito.
Ayan, Teacher Zari at Teacher Mika, hindi lang po mga teachers ang viewers natin ngayon, may mga estudyante po, kahit yung mga magulang at kahit yung mga tao na laging sumusubaybay sa atin po. Ayan, so pasalamatan po natin silang lahat kasi po nakaantabay talaga sila every Saturday. Ayan.
So, ayan.
Sino dito yung mga from last week nandito na? Sige, type nyo naman po sa chat box natin. Kung napanood nyo po yung last week natin, ano ba yung topic natin last week?
Oo nga,
Yan.
ano nga ba
Tingnan
yun?
natin.
Parang nakalimutan ko. Baka naman, baka kayo dyan, teachers, yung mga viewers natin last week, refresher naman dyan sa mga hosts, oh.
Yes.
Ayan.
At syempre po yung hashtag natin, no? TechTalks for all. Ayan, pakilagay naman dyan sa comment box. Ayan.
Huwag natin kakalimutan yan. Again, hashtag TechTalks.
Okay, and it's for all po. Walang pinipili. Ayan,
Yes.
napakaganda ng buhay talaga, no? Ayan na. So, Teacher Zari, Teacher Mika, I know po, very excited na kasi manonood natin eh. So, before po natin ipakilala yung napakagandang babae din sa balat ng lupa para i-welcome tayong lahat. Paalala ko lang din po, huwag po ninyong kalimutan na yung mga account po natin sa DepEd, training.deped.gov.ph po. Para naman po, makaklaim kayo ng national certificate. Yung may certificate po tayo sa buong araw. Hindi lang para this morning po. Meron din po. Kasi buong araw talaga yung event ni Microsoft eh. Sa morning at sa afternoon. May event pa po tayo this afternoon. So with that, pag nakompleto nila yung pa-quiz natin sa LMS ng DepEd po, makukuha nila yung certificate of participation for this day. Pero pag nakompleto po nila yung whole month of April po, Teacher Zari at Teacher Mika, makakakuha po sila ng Certificate of Recognition.
Yun.
Ayan.
So, ang daming certificate na makukuha ng mga teachers natin. So, nakakadagdag ng credentials yan sa
Yes.
mga teachers.
Kahit tayo din po siguro, no, pwede tayo doon. Kukuha din ako ng
Yes
certificate
po.
mamaya. Teacher Rubilin.
Teacher Zari.
Yan, Teacher
Kahit yung
Rubilin,
mga
meron na
students.
lang pong bumati sa inyo. Si Teacher Mark Edward, sabi niya, happy birthday, Teacher Rubilin. Magandang araw po mga teachers. Happy weekend and learning watching from Region 3 STO, Mabalacat City, Pampanga. At hindi na wala yung ating hashtag TechTalks dyan. Ayan, TechTalks for all.
So,
Ayan,
meron din
so,
tayo isa pa from our admin dito. Ayan, meron tayong assistant principal. O, di ba? Hindi lang
Wow.
tayo basta teachers, may admin tayo. So, si Ma'am Maria Cecilia Vasconcillo. So, thank you daw po for awarding me with a Tech Savvy Novice Badge from DepEd EdTech Unit. So,
Cool.
yan.
wow.
Congratulations po! Yan.
Wow,
So, may
ganyan
sumagot
talaga
sa atin dito.
ka-amazing, no?
Opo, may sumagot sa atin dito sa comments. Sabi niya si Ma'am Emma Enriquez Artates. So last week daw ang topic natin ay Minecraft education, PowerPoint, Sway, and Paint 3D. O,
Oh,
kompleto
di
si
ba?
Wow,
Madam.
perfect na
100%.
perfect.
Pasado na po kayo. A+++ na si teacher sa atin dyan.
Ang galing. So with that, Teacher Zari, wag na po natin silang paghintayin, no? Pakilala na po natin yung bisita natin to welcome us formally po.
Sige po,
Alright.
teacher. Would you like to do the honor, Teacher Rubelin? Para pakilala po natin ang magbibigay ng pangunang bati sa ating lahat?
Pwedeng-pwede po. Ayan. So, to welcome us formally this morning, hindi po basta-basta yung makakasama natin, no? Ayan. Siya lang naman po yung Education Lead ng Microsoft Education Philippines po. Ayan, siya po yung kaisang dilag po na hindi lang siya empowering, total package na po siya. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome po Miss Clarissa Sigismondo. Good morning!
Good morning
Hi,
po.
Miss Isang.
Good morning
Good
po.
morning, everyone. I just want to check, can you hear me clearly?
Yes po.
Miss
Yes po.
Isang.
All right. Good morning. And yeah, that was so kind of you, Teacher Rubilin, and happy birthday to you. Good morning to our parents, to our teachers, and to our students who are tuned in today. I hope you're all having an amazing Saturday morning. Now, the Tech Talks for all webinars are truly a great platform for Microsoft and DepEd to provide you quality content which are really relevant in today's settings. Patuloy na sumusuporta ang Microsoft sa DepEd sa pagbibigay sa inyo ng tamang laman sa ating mga guro at estudyante upang patuloy nating matugunan ang pangangailangan ng DepEd sa delivery of education. Ang theme natin ngayon, which is strengthening our environment in providing an inclusive and accessible education, is very apt in today's world. And it's absolutely appropriate dahil tinitingnan natin ngayon ano nga ba talaga ang kailangan na skills ng ating mga estudyante na naituturo ng teachers, lalo na ngayon na lahat tayo ay nasa ating mga devices, may access tayo to information, may access tayo sa internet, may access tayo sa iba't ibang gadgets. How critical is empathy and the development of cognitive skills in today's digital world? Are there tools and resources available for us to teach and promote empathy for an inclusive environment? In the last 12 months, sa dinami-dami ng ating mga online meeting, events, parties, at mga devices natin, where were we able to build connections and grow friendships? Or did we feel even more disconnected, not just to everyone, but even to ourselves? That's a question that I want all of us to reflect in, while we listen to our speakers and, we hear their insights and their thoughts based on, what they know and what they've experienced. How do we address this? Do we ask for help? Are there tools and resources being given to us, readily available for us, and even trainings para bilang magulang, bilang adults, bilang teachers, matugunan natin ang emotional and mental well-being ng ating mga estudyante din. When we say emotional and mental well-being and providing an inclusive and accessible teaching and learning environment, how do we define that? Because it's really so vague. What is empathy, right? Everything now is delivered digitally, fortunately and unfortunately. A lot of times wala tayong choice kasi virtual lahat eh. How do we reach out to others even if things are being delivered online? like what we are doing today, right? We hope that, in the next few hours, you will be able to draw valuable insights, valuable meaning from what will be shared by our dearest speakers. We are very honored, and it's really an honor to have Mr. Lance Cabigas of Monash University and Miss Christine Canon, our dearest teacher, Tin, founder of Create Learning Paths. Who will share with us their thoughts, their insights, their ideas, and best practices. Congratulations in advance to DepEd's EdTech unit for putting this together, and to our global training partner, Audentes Technologies. I am excited as you are, so let me now turn this over to our lovely hosts, our Microsoft Education Ambassadors, and the EdTech unit.
Yan. Thank you po.
Wow.
Thank you po, Miss Isang. Yan. So, sabi nga po ni Miss Isang, di ba, we need to understand yung word na empathy. Yun yung ating pwedeng maging word of the day. Ayan. So, type niyo naman po dyan yung word natin na empathy. Yan. So, tingin.
Empathy.
Empathy.
Bawal po wrong
Ayan.
spelling teachers.
Ayan. Pero yan, tingnan po natin, marami pa pong nagko-comment po dito. Ayan, si Ma'am Ella Rafael po, happy birthday daw po, Ma'am Rubilin. From Sir Charles din po. Ayan, so ang dami mabati kay Ma'am Rubilin.
Oo nga. Talaga si Rubilin, no? Ayan, so
Siya po talaga yung artista natin dito.
Totoo. Siya po ang ating main star for this morning. May nabasa din po ako dito, teacher. So, gusto ko to actually. From Teacher Glenn C. Tagibaw. Good morning po sa mga beautiful hosts po ngayong umaga. Ayan. And of course, syempre, hindi mawala ang happiest birthday, Cap Rubelin, with lovely emoji.
Yes. Maraming salamat po sa lahat. Ayan, no, so yung mga viewers po natin, I know po, yung sinabi nga kanina ni Miss Isang, no, yung nasabi niya, yung inclusive education that is accessible to all, and of course, word empathy. At lagi ko pong pinapasalamatan si Miss Isang po kasi hindi ko siya makakalimutan kasi kahit I'm teaching elementary school students, we able to invite him before po to speak to my learners about empathy and of course, inclusivity in education. Ayan. Very available kasi po siya para sa mga kabataan po natin. Yes. Thank you so much po, Miss Isang.
Ayan. We're so blessed na may mga ganyan po tayong speakers, lalo na from Microsoft, no? So, hindi lang tayo basta natututo ng mga technological tools, yung mga applications, pero meron tayong iba pang klaseng learning, mga values na pwede nating apply as teachers and pwede nating ituro sa mga estudyante natin.
At napaka-importante nun, di ba, Teacher Rubel, Teacher Mika? Values talaga yung magdadala sa atin. At hindi lang kasi talaga sapat na marami lang tayong alam na gawin, kundi dapat alam din natin talaga paano makaramdam sa ibang tao. Tama?
Yes po, kasi nga, life is a series of relationship po. Hindi lang po tayo nabubuhay na mag-isa, so we need other people and we need to consider them as well. Ayan, so,
No
ang
man is an
dami na
island
dito.
talaga.
Yan, ang
Alright.
dami nang nag-message po ng empathy. Diyan sa comment box natin, bumabaha na.
So, yung mga nasa comment box po natin, kung ma-share nyo po yung link nitong ating Facebook Live sa mga kaibigan nyo po, sa mga teachers, kahit po non-teachers, kasi yung topic naman natin is for all, di ba? So, kahit sino po, pwede nyo pong isend sa kanila, share nyo po sa Facebook page po ninyo. Ayan, share nyo po sa mga estudyante ninyo para mas marami po tayo na makanood.
Yes, exactly. At marami rin po kayo talaga mapupulot ditong aral. Marami kayong mapupulot na topics na pwede nyo pong pag-usapan sa loob ng bahay nyo habang kumakain kayo sa hapagkainan ninyo, nakikipag-usap sa mga kaibigan ninyo, di ba? Para hindi lang basta-basta kung ano-ano lang kayo nagkukwentuhan natin. Makapagkwentuhan naman tayo tungkol dun sa mga pwede na makaunlad o makadagdag sa ating pagkatao. Diba?
Exactly. Ayan, no? Lalo na pag makilala nila yung mga speakers natin mamaya, Teacher Zaria, Teacher Mika. I know po, they will be inspired by them. Ayan. Alright. So, para excited na siguro sila for our first guest speaker, Teacher Zaria, Teacher Mika.
Sige
Ayan, no?
po. Ayan, since everyone is obviously thrilled for this morning's discussion, ang dami na rin talaga ditong nagko-comment sa ating chat box. Gising na gising ang ating mga tagapanood. So sige, ang nangunguna sa listahan ng ating speakers today ay papakilala ko na po, Teacher Ruben, Teacher Mika, ay isang international educator. He has an extensive background in both Philippine and Australian educational systems na talaga namang di din talaga magpapahuli pagdating sa larangan ng pagtuturo. He obtained his Master of Education in Inclusive and Special Education from Monash University, and I hope I pronounce it right, in Australia. He did presented his research studies about education and technology sa Japan lang naman and Singapore. Sa kasulukuyan, isa po siyang Education Support Officer in a specialist school at isang e-learning designer sa Monash University. Here to share his take about how educators can meet the needs of special education students in a remote learning setup, let me introduce to you Mr. Lance Cabigas. Good morning, Sir Lance.
Good morning po sa lahat and sa lahat po ng mga nanonood ng stream. Welcome and good morning po. Thank you so much for devoting the time to come here. And we're gonna thank you for coming to this talk about accessibility and inclusion in the learning space, both in the online and even in face-to-face contexts. So once we have started with the presentation, I hope you guys will be able to learn a lot. I'm really excited to share the things I've learned here and help teachers as well to improve and hone their craft. So thank you so much for coming here. And we're just going to be waiting for my PowerPoint presentation to be flashed on the screen. So while waiting for that, I think parang yung parents ko ata, if-force na ata akong isend yung link sa kanila para makakapanood sila, pero mamaya na yun. So, welcome everyone to Accessibility and Inclusion in the Learning Space. And our objectives for this program will be flashed in the next slide. So we have 4 main goals that we want to achieve today. The first one is that we're going to be discussing po about the social model disability in order for us to try lang po na i-switch po the way we think about people with disabilities, students with disabilities. The second is we're going to talk about a little bit about the 3-tiered support system, which is a framework towards a long-term kind of support towards our students. But the main depth of our talk for today is related to the supports that we can give to our students, both in their academics and their behavior. So hindi lang po tayo about the way they learn, but also the way they behave, especially now that we are just communicating with one another in these screens. So let's start our program with the next slide. So we're going to start our talk by, I want you guys to imagine, I want all of us to try to imagine this Rubik's Cube. How can we make a Rubik's Cube accessible, usable, if one of our students, if for our parents, if one of our children has a visual impairment? In a sense, they may not be able to distinguish these patterns of color. So how do you think we will be able to give access to our students to our Rubik's Cube if they aren't able to distinguish these patterns of color? When we did this experiment in the past, a participant actually said, may nagsabi po na tanggalin yung kulay and replace the colors with braille patterns. To an extent, it does make sense, right? If the student can't distinguish colors, remove the colors, put in braille patterns that they'll be able to arrange instead. However, if you think upon it a bit deeper, we actually realize that by trying to include student A, by giving access to student A, we may actually be excluding student B, who may not know how braille patterns work or can just see colors fine. So this is often the problem we have with inclusion, wherein in the pursuit na yung goal po natin na bigyan ng access yung isang estudyante, hindi po natin minsan namamalayan na ini-exclude na po natin yung ibang estudyante. So, what then should inclusion be? In the next slide, we can talk about what inclusion is. So, in a nutshell, inclusion is a belief wherein all students, lahat po ng estudyante natin inside our classrooms should have access to the learning activities. So even if they come from different backgrounds, even if they have different special needs, when we design our lessons, there is the expectation that they should be able to participate in the learning experience. So that's what inclusion in education means. Every student should be able to participate in the learning experience regardless of their backgrounds or their special needs. In the next slide, we can actually ask the question, therefore, with that kind of idealism that all students should be included, is it therefore easy to create that inclusive environment? There is a Maori saying with regards to inclusion, which says, with your basket and my basket, the learner will thrive. Um, in the earlier in the earlier speakers, we talked about teamwork, whole school collaboration, that we're not supposed to be alone as teachers. So it's not just your basket, your efforts that should be devoted to ensure that the learner is learning, is participating. It's not just my basket, but your basket as well, from the administration to the support staff, to the faculty, to even the security group. Everyone should at least believe in that vision, that all students should be able to participate regardless of their backgrounds. So, is it easy to foster inclusion? In the next slide, the answer is, well, not exactly. It requires teamwork, whole school collaboration, and at the center of all those efforts, lahat ng mga pinagagawa po natin na we create ramps for students with movement impairments, or we do this, we create different adjustments. At the center of all those baskets, of all those efforts, is our student, to ensure that they are not excluded. Therefore, is it easy? It's a long-term process, so it depends on the school context that you are in. Next slide. So we have discussed what inclusion is, wherein we say that inclusion is about making sure that every student is able to participate in the learning experience. But how can we make sure that we are inclusive of all our students? The key word there is accessibility. We are all familiar with this story. There's a tree, and the different creatures, different animals need to be able to climb the tree for them to be able to participate. Definitely for the monkey and for the lion, they may be able to scale the tree quite easily. Therefore, they are included. But what about the piglet and the fish? Do we judge them because our activity is exclusive, is making them excluded? Or do we actually seek to become better and change the activity? So this is what it means by accessibility, making sure that everyone can participate. So in the next slide, we can see how accessibility means, what accessibility means in the field of education, wherein accessibility means it's a conscious effort on the parts of the teachers, of us teachers, to plan ahead. That we would check our class list. Okay, one of my students maybe has a special need, has a disability, that maybe my student has ADHD, or my student has a visual impairment. So what will I do with my activities? Should I just distribute texts? No, even though I know that one of my students has a visual impairment, or should I make certain adjustments? So this kind of planning is called designing out the inequality. And this helps to prevent exclusion by planning ahead, by removing these walls, so that when the time comes, our students, hindi po sila mababangga sa pader na yun. So ensuring accessibility in the classroom means that we are acknowledging that it's not exactly the disability of the student that is preventing them from participating. Rather, it's the environment around them. So this is what the social model of disability means. It's not the disability that's preventing the student, it is the environment. So yes, in the next slide, we can actually see some questions related to that. What excludes a student with impaired movement? So probably they are using a movement assistive device like a wheelchair from going up the second floor of our schools. Is it because they have difficulties in walking or climbing the stairs? Or is because our schools do not have ramps in them? What prevents a student with hearing difficulties from engaging with a media presentation? Is it because they have hearing difficulties? Or is it because the media presentation doesn't have subtitles for them to actually engage with? What prevents a student with reading difficulties with reading difficulty from engaging with a text or with a book? Is it because they have a reading difficulty, or is it because the book or the text has really inappropriate font that makes it hard for them to read, that jumbles the letters as they read? So the social model of disability challenges us teachers to ask ourselves the question, is my activity, is my lesson appropriate for the students that I have? Is there a part in my lesson that creates barriers for my students, that excludes my students? Because at the end of the day, the social model of disability believes that it is not the disability that hinders the student, but the environment around them that is excluding them. So now in the next slide, we're just going to have a short recap of what we have discussed so far. I've discussed three things. Um, we've discussed inclusion, which means making sure that every student is able to participate in the learning experience. We have accessibility, which means making sure to design out features that might exclude student. And of course, we have our perspective on disability, na yung student with disability, the reason bakit po hindi siya nasasali sa mga learning experiences or sa society in general, hindi po dahil meron siyang kapansanan, pero dahil yung environment po around niya is that hindi po accessible para sa kanya. So we're shifting our focus from the disability to the environment of the student. Sa next slide, we're gonna see how these three things are interconnected. So connected po actually sila. We started with changing the way we think. No? We shift our focus from the child's disability to the environment around them. So we change how we think. And when we change how we think, when we subscribe to the social model of disability, we are able to proactively think about our lessons, our activities, to see kung meron po bang features of exclusion na we can still remove. Because at the end of the day po, we cannot control the student's disability, but we can control our lessons. Finally, once we are able to make sure that there is access to our lessons, once we are able to create accessibility by designing out these exclusion features, then we're able to foster inclusion. So inclusion begins by changing the way we think. So that's my encouragement for everyone, that hopefully we try to change how we think about persons with disabilities. Right? It's not their disability that limits them, it's their environment. Next slide. So those three things that we have discussed, I hope that's the foundation of this entire program. But the two main questions I would like us to answer for this talk is, number one, why should I even care, right? Ang dami na nating trabaho as teachers, but why should we have to exert extra effort to make sure that every student is included? That we have to print different sets of materials, we have to make different activities just to include a student, just to include different students. And how can I create that kind of learning, of that kind of inclusive learning environment? So let's answer the first question first in the next slide. So why should I even care about promoting inclusion? Next slide again. Two reasons actually that were really important in inclusion. Number one, student variance. Each student, we know as teachers, I think especially for veteran teachers, we know that every student is different. Yung isang student nagre-respond po sa ganito na activity, yung isang student nagre-respond sa activity. No student is the same. And that's especially true for students with special needs, that they have different needs that need to be met. So what happens if those needs are not met, especially when students are being excluded? So when they are being excluded, when the student feels that, oh, I'm not a part of the class, they actually begin to exhibit challenging behaviors. So we can see that na yung student bored, nag-iingay, or even worse in my experience po, since I'm working in a special education school, nagwawala, very physical. Ilang beses, meron na po ata akong trophy po ng mga sugat sa kamay. But our students are not acting out, are not lashing out. Hindi po sila nananakit because they want to. Most of the time, this is the only way they know how to communicate. So, especially for our students na hindi po sila nakakapagsalita, physical actions are the only way that they can tell us that their needs are not being met. In other words, these actions, these challenging behaviors are cries for help. So how can we avoid challenging behaviors? By meeting their needs. And how can we meet their needs? By making sure that we are fostering an inclusive environment kung saan lahat, they can feel safe, they can feel included. This is why we need to foster inclusion. Next slide. The more important question is, how can we create inclusive learning environments? And it's a really in-depth discussion, so bear with me. Next slide. I believe in supporting the students via different programs that work hand in hand together. So we have 4 strategies for us today, and my goal for these 4 strategies is that hopefully madali lang po and you can immediately implement them in your classrooms with as little preparation, with as little cost as possible, kasi hirap na nga po tayo, di ba? So we're gonna briefly talk about the multi-tiered systems of support in the next slide, but it's not going to be super in-depth because it will require another hour for that. So it's just going to be a short discussion. So in the next slide, the multi-tiered support system, it challenges us to question our programs in the school. Is the provided in your school, in your own context. If a student has any difficulties, or kapag nag-misbehave po siya, if nahirapan po siya na mag-cope sa lesson, ano po ginagawa ng schools po natin? Some schools, they may offer tutorials for the student. Tutorial, and then after that, they're done with the tutorial. The student is now on their own again. Yung ibang schools, they actually just punish the child. No? So nag-misbehave yung bata, na-punish, and then pinabalik, binigyan lang ng violation slip, pinabalik, and then antayin na magka-violation ulit. Is our goal for our programs to help the students learn coping mechanisms, to help them change? Or is it just to punish them? The multi-tiered systems of support in the next slide shows us that supporting a child in an inclusive environment makes challenges us teachers to create supports that are intertwined, that builds upon one another. So supports should not be isolated na one time, big time lang, tapos na yung support. I believe supports should be intertwined. So the multi-tiered support system states that there are 3 levels of support that we can give to our students, and even for parents to our child. Tier 1, universal supports, it's support for everyone. So this is where we talked about proactive planning. So when you print out larger fonts for your student with reading difficulties, or when you know that you have students with movement impairments, you would make sure that your classroom is on the ground floor. So those are proactive plannings that supports everyone. Those are universal supports. And according to research po, proper implementation of tier 1 strategies, 80 to 90% of students don't even need to go to tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 2, but of course, we cannot avoid po no, na may mga bata talaga na kailangan ng additional support, especially for behavior. So, I had a student na sobrang physical, na nananakit siya. So hindi na po enough yung tier 1 na we just give that we establish expectations and rules. No? Kailangan po siya ng additional support. Now, we even went up to tier 3 that kailangan ng therapist. But those are extreme cases. And in most cases, tier 1 supports, when implemented well, it will prevent a lot of challenging behaviors from happening, because at the end of the day, we are addressing the needs of the student. So now let's begin in the next slide with the first ever strategy. So a focus on universal supports po muna, no? Bakit yung strategies ko ngayon, lahat po sila universal supports lang, tier 1 supports. So I'm focusing po on universal supports because number 1, I want all of us po na we can immediately implement them with hopefully in our classrooms, online or face-to-face. Strategies that are low cost, hopefully low cost lang po, para hindi po masyadong mabubutas yung mga wallets po natin. And lastly, because these strategies I have here are empirical. So they are based on studies that, according to these studies, they had great success rates. Let's begin with the first strategy. And then next slide. The first strategy we have here is designing out inequalities. We've talked about this in the first few slides, but let's look at this scenario. No, a teacher presents an uncaptioned educational YouTube video to the class. So, do you think this might exclude certain students? Definitely it can. So, sa mga online classes po natin, nagpakita po tayo ng ng YouTube video, which is a very engaging tool. But if we have a student with visual impairment, hindi po siya makaka-engage po nun. If we have a student with hearing impairment, hindi po siya makaka-engage ng tama kasi nahirapan po siya makikinig. So what can we do for that? We can actually have, for students with hearing impairments, maybe we can have subtitles. For ESL learners na medyo hindi pa ganun kahasa sa English, maybe we can have subtitles in the native tongue para mas madali po sa kanila mag-comprehend. Next slide. So in the next slide, we have, for example, if the teacher would just present a picture po, no, nag-share screen lang po siya ng picture. What about for the students na merong visual impairment? Paano po siya makakapag-engage po sa picture? And how can we fix that? For example, if the picture is really important, what we do in our school is that we actually have written description of the pictures to help the student try to imagine, visualize what the picture is showing. So what's the lesson here in the next slide? That in the age of digital technologies po, no, marami po tayong digital tools na po ngayon. They actually create, some of them actually create barriers for students. For example, YouTube videos, online pictures. They're very engaging, make no mistake. But without proper planning, without proper designing of these materials, we may actually be excluding our students with special needs. So, audio recordings without transcripts, definitely. Meron po tayong audio recordings, pero yung bata na mayroong hearing impairment, hindi po siya makakapag-participate. So what if we give him a transcript? Next slide is that in face-to-face settings, it's also possible to be excluding students. So the common pitfall is that a single size will fit all, but that clashes with our social model disability because what works because for the stairs that would work for a number of people, it will not work for a student with movement difficulties. So for example, if you're in your classrooms, you're giving out text, paper lang, paper and text na babasahin ng bata. Yung bata na meron pong reading difficulty, hindi po siya makapag-participate ng tama. So baka kailangan po natin ng text-to-speech software. Windows actually is a very good text-to-speech software. It's called Narrator. So once the student uses that free program, it will actually read out the text on the screen to the user. So they're still able to comprehend what the story is all about by using the text-to-speech function. So next slide. How can we make sure to avoid inequalities? So simply 4 principles are needed. Perceivability, can the student perceive it? Can the student see it with the senses that they have? Operability, can the student interact with that? For example, I may be able to see the text, right? I may be able to see the text. But if I have reading difficulties po, yung font, malay po na ginawa po natin cursive yung font, I cannot interact with that text. Hindi ko ma-operate yung text even though I can see it. Kasi hindi po siya, it's not in a font that is addressing my reading difficulties. Understandability, naka-angkop po ba yung lesson sa level ng knowledge ko? Baka 1 plus 1 pa po lang ako, pero yung lesson algebra na, kawawa naman po ako. And lastly is robustness. This is often for online classes, but what this means is that, it's really easy now to get websites from different places in the internet. And then you ask the student to access the website as a learning tool, and that's fine. However, some students do not have laptops. Some students do not have or cannot use laptops po, no? So they can only use either iPhones or certain devices. And when they access those websites, na okay naman kung sa laptop, when they access on their phones, medyo yung format all over the place po. So that's what it means by robustness. Now, what works in a laptop or in a single medium should also work for other mediums in case the student uses that medium. So again, it's not their disability that's preventing them from joining the web, from using the website. It's actually the website itself, the environment. So those are the 4 principles. So how do we see them in action? So next slide. So for example, we are trying to present a text to a student. So perceivability, it should be in different formats. Maybe the text is inside a laptop na meron text-to-speech function for them to actually hear the text. Or maybe the device has a zoom function that they can zoom in on the letters in case they want to read more. Operability, we already talked about adjusting font styles and font sizes. But maybe in a face-to-face setting, if yung bata merong fine motor disability, so hindi po siya nakakapag-flick through sa pages, maybe we can have the pages all in front of him na he doesn't need to flick through it, babasahin na lang po niya. Understandability, this requires us to have good assessment. So dapat po natin in-assess na saang level na po ba yung bata. We're going to talk about understandability, this assessment, saang level yung bata in the next strategy. And lastly, robustness, wherein we need to make sure that our websites, our materials are mobile device friendly, for example, or compatible with other devices. Okay. So that's the end of the first strategy. The second strategy is actually more interesting. This is what really gets me going. The second strategy for the next slide. So we've talked about designing out inequalities, but let's talk about keeping track of cognitive load. So cognitive load is pretty much how well we actually think. But first of all, let's look at this picture first. I want you to remember as much details in the picture as possible, especially how many lions there are. Just try to remember the entire picture if you can. And we're gonna go back to this picture soon enough. So, okay, try to remember as much as you can. And next slide. We're gonna go back to that picture. So, cognitive load theory, or CLT, sa mga language teachers, hindi po yan communicative language teaching. This theory says that human brains can only process small amounts of information at a time. No? But when we're actually remembering our long-term memory, sobra po nating daming ma-remember. This is very practical po, no, na it took us years to learn adding, subtracting, multiplying. But now when we do algebra, in a split second, we can do all of those operations in a second. Years of learning can already be done in a few seconds. That's CLT in action. Example, kung nag-aaway po kayo ng partner niyo, you can easily remember lahat po ng kasalanan nila. So, nakalimutan yung anniversary nung March 5, hindi nahugas ng pinggan nung January. So once it's in our memory, in our long-term memory, ang dali na lang. But while we're learning it, there's a process involved. Mas mahirap po siya. So that's CLT. Next slide. How is CLT related to education? No? Studies actually show that students with special needs, or even some students, need to exert more effort to process new information. So mas nahirapan po sila. They need to devote more resources to just transform that new knowledge into long-term. As such, we have the responsibility as teachers to reduce unnecessary loads kung saan pwede. Next slide. So, do you remember how many lions there were in the picture? So, if you don't remember, that's fine. That's fine. It's just CLT in action. No? It's just the cognitive load in action. So if you go to the next slide, there are actually 18 lions. And if you don't remember that there were lions at the back, dun sa right side ng screen, meron pong dalawa dun sa likod, merong apat dun sa likod rin. If you don't remember those details, that's fine because that's CLT in action. Now, it's really hard for us to remember a lot of those details kapag new information pa lang po siya. Because we can only process a lot of things in a span of a few seconds. So, next slide po. We're going to talk now about cognitive load theory and how they are related to education po. No? So, there are 3 cognitive loads. The first one, germane, is the most helpful to learning. So, this is the way. This is the way that students learn. So germane load means this is the effort it takes for the student to transform the new information into long-term. In other words, to bring that new information back to our long-term memory. That's germane load, and that's what we want. Intrinsic is the inherent effort po, no, na mas mahirap po mag-learn ng algebra as compared to 1 plus 1. So each content has inherent difficulties, inherent loads. And lastly, this is the load that we are expected to control as teachers, extrinsic. So ito yung mga additional stress sa lesson from poor design. So for example, yung classroom nyo po habang nag-lesson po kayo, or sa Zoom, or sa Microsoft Teams na sobrang ingay, parang merong nag-lesson sa Baguio or something like that, na merong bagyo na sobrang ingay. It adds to the cognitive load because the students have to exert more effort to just listen, even though the goal is just for them to learn, right? So in the next slide, we can talk about how we can use these 3 loads. So these three loads are actually the total cognitive load, and overload happens when there's too much extrinsic load, when there's too much intrinsic load. So how can we control these three loads? In the next slide. The first one is how can we, our goals for this is number one, to align the intrinsic load, to reduce the extrinsic load, and to increase the germane load. So how can we align? In the next slide. Again, we know that the intrinsic load is the inherent difficulty. So mas mahirap yung linguistics kaysa sa nouns, di ba? But how can we make it easier for our kids? So imagine niyo, pina-semantics, pina-pragmatics po kayo ng sunod-sunod. Why not chunk the students' lessons so that at least the intrinsic load becomes lighter, no? Becomes lighter. So that's what we can do for the intrinsic load. But we need to remember as well that the task shouldn't be too easy or no learning occurs, or it shouldn't be too hard as well, masyadong above. Remember sa understandability, it shouldn't be too hard or else yung bata magiging frustrated lang. Next slide is extrinsic load, no? And this is often coming from poor design. So for example, it's very easy sa PowerPoint, sa mga Microsoft Teams classes po natin, na marami po tayong information sa slide. But that just creates more extrinsic load kasi mas nahihirapan sila mag-pick out ng important details po, no? So we need to maintain a pattern across all presentations. It's better if we can clean up our slides, we can clean up our materials. Huwag masyadong maraming kulay. Imagine mo yellow and red yung font. That's very distracting. So we need to maintain a pattern across all presentations. So if you started your presentation with point, explanation, example, the lesson should be structured in that way as well. Now you also keep doing presentation, explanation, example, so that the predictability helps in giving the students that control over their learning. Next slide. The most important one is increasing germane load. So we need to increase their ability to put more information into the long term. So the most common strategy we can use here is worked examples. So this is even, tawag nito, yung worked examples na this is often observed in math, wherein the math teacher gives out a problem that they solve first, and then the student will model. That's what we call as worked examples. And that's very important, especially now in online learning, kasi maraming distractions. So worked examples allow students to see how the end product looks like and what are the steps to get to that product. Explicit directions or instructions are also welcome because it helps, wala nang paligoy-ligoy, use simple language. Na in my context, when we want a student to do something, we actually tell them, first work, then play. Work and then play. So it simplifies. It's a very explicit instruction, especially for students with special needs, and it helps them to get their priorities in check. Right, next slide. So that was a lot of things we discussed, but let's just summarize it just a little bit. We wanted to design out inequalities, and we wanted to keep track of cognitive load. So we need to remember that when we are planning our lessons, we need to make sure that students can see it, can perceive it, can interact with it, can understand it. It should be at their level, and it should be portable across different devices. For example, Microsoft Word Online can actually be ported quite well across laptop and phones if you're using those materials as texts. Keeping track of cognitive load, we need to make sure that the subject is not too easy, is not too hard. It should be at their level, and if possible, chunk it. We should chunk the lesson so that the intrinsic load is lightened. Extrinsic load, make sure we make our PowerPoints clear, and that there shouldn't be any distractions outside, especially in the classroom environment. Increasing germane load, we can use worked examples. We can present in our screens. We can present examples that students can model so that the germane load increases, that they can get more new information into their long-term memory. So that's for the academics po, no? The second one is for behavior supports, and these are really simple, really quick strategies. So in the next slide, so the load should be enough. Definitely, the load should definitely be enough to challenge the student without driving the student to the point of frustration. That's the point of cognitive load. So if a child, so this is my favorite quote from Herner, which just really means that if a child doesn't know, if our student doesn't know how to read, how to swim, how to multiply, we teach them. But if you don't know how to behave, do we teach them or do we punish them? Right? So in the next slide, our goal is we don't want to punish students for something they don't know. We just want to teach them first. So the first strategy, especially in online classrooms, is to establish classroom expectations. It needs to be, these expectations needs to be explicit and direct. The teacher needs to model them. These expectations need to be visible, all right? During the lessons, for example, if you have your rules in your classroom expectations, maybe you can present them in your PowerPoint. And of course, when implementing it, we need to have consistency. And of course, opportunities for the students to achieve that expectation. So let's have an example in the next slide, how this works. So for example, you want the student to use the raise hand function in Microsoft Teams, no? You want them to use that before they share an idea. So number one, explicit instruction. We need to tell them explicitly what we want them to do. Student, or you can use as well I statements. I will use the raise hand function if I want to share my ideas. Make sure that expectation is displayed, is clear, and succinct for them. Modeling. Then you can explicitly teach them how to use the raise hand function in Microsoft Teams. Visibility. Maybe you can have posters behind you. If you have green screens, that's always good. You can have your expectations behind you. Consistency. So if a student does speak out of turn, gently remind the student, now, okay, wait, before you continue, use the raise hand function. So guide the student. And then once they do it, and then once they raise their hand in Microsoft Teams, then you allow them to share. Of course, opportunities. You don't have expectations, but hindi naman nila maa-achieve. So give them the opportunity to achieve those expectations, right? So if they were able to raise their hand, what do? You praise, which leads us to the last strategy in the next slide. My student was able to follow the instructions, the expectations. What do I do? Then we praise in the next slide. Praising is very important. Na just because yung bata masyadong makulit, kasi hindi natin siya ipipraise na. This is all the more na kailangan natin siya i-praise because praising reinforces desired behaviors. So if we have the behaviors that we want them to do, praising them actually makes those behaviors more likely to happen again. Now, on a more social emotional level, it helps us to establish positive relationships with our kids. Na kahit sobrang kulit nung bata, praising helps them to trust us more. So studies show that effective praise may enable student achievement to increase by even up to 40%. The common question is how often should I praise? In the next slide, how often should I praise? The answer is 4:1. So for every reprimand nung bata na pinagalitan mo yung bata, you reminded the kid not to do it, you praise them 4 times. So if they do something good after that reprimand, they're able to do the expectation, you praise them. They're able to do the activity, you praise them again. They're able to do something else na good, you praise them. Why? Positive framing of behavior makes our jobs easier because when you just reprimand them, you're just telling them not to do something. But your expectations are not reinforced. What reinforces expectations effectively are praises. So focus more on what the child did good and address what they did wrong in a very gentle way. But don't forget to praise them afterwards. So yes, we should praise, praise, praise. But there's also the expectation in the next slide to praise effectively, to praise well. So compare these two praises. Good job today, Kate, versus I'm really proud of the way you did your best to speak in English today. Do you notice a difference between the two? There definitely is a difference. The first one is very general. The second one is quite specific. But which one do you think will reinforce the behavior of speaking English? It's definitely the second one, because in your second praise, you are explicitly telling the student what praise or what behavior you are praising. So in the next slide, um, we have this kind of information where it's called behavior specific praise. So it shouldn't just be a praise, a general praise. It should be specific to a certain behavior, contingent to a certain behavior, right? So um, so our praises should focus on their efforts, not because they were so good or ang bilis nila, but their efforts should be the one that is praised. So you were able to speak in complete English, right? Related to the behavior. Next slide. So how do we do something like that? We'll have this short exercise first. So Ray is a teacher in grade 8, and his expectation in class is always keep the classroom clean. So his students were able to clean up the chairs, to arrange the chairs. So he tells his class, good job, this is great. Was it a good praise or no? It was not a good praise. Definitely it wasn't. No, it was a positive, it was not a good praise because it was too general and may not reinforce the desired behavior. You want the student to keep cleaning the classroom, but you're not telling them what behavior you're praising. So how do we make behavior specific praises? In the next slide, it's very simple. 3 things. Number one, make sure to say the name of the learner. Better if you use their first name. Make sure to, number two, to state the desired behavior you want to praise. So arranging the chairs and tables. And lastly, the expectation that was met. So good job for cleaning the classroom. Good job for arranging the chairs because that keeps our classroom clean. That's how you make a behavior specific praise. So next slide, just a short summary because now we are at the end. Um, there are different, so established expectations just means that we need to teach the student how to behave. We can't punish them for something they don't know. So we need to model, we need to teach those behaviors explicitly, especially in an online setting where we have so many tools. We need to create opportunities for students to achieve these expectations, which will lead us to praising them. So we need to focus on their good deeds, but we need to also ensure that when we are praising our students, that it should be specific to their behavior. In the next slide, I'll be ending this presentation by going back to the basket. But before that, we have to bring it all together. So these are the things in my basket. This is the things I offer you. You first design, for us to create an inclusive classroom, we need to design out exclusionary features, no? We need to make sure that students are not overloaded. We need to make sure that they are taught how to behave explicitly. And we now know that we need to praise them effectively. These are the things I offer to you. So in the next slide, these are the strategies I want to give to you. This is my basket, and now it's your turn to offer your basket forward to make sure that the learner will thrive. So thank you very much for listening, and that is the end of my presentation.
Cabigas, Sir Mr. Cabigas. Ayan. So, I think marami naman pong natutunan ng ating mga commenters dito. So, ang dami po nating comment dito kanina. We also have here from Miss Isang. Si Miss Isang po may takeaway po siya dito. So sabi niya, shifting the child's disability to the environment to address the disability. And meron pa po tayong isa from Ma'am Lina. Sabi niya dito, it is not the disability that hinders a student to learn. It's the environment around them. Sabi niya, wow, this is great. Ayan. So, we're very happy po na marami po kayong natutunan. So, it's time for our Q&A. Ayan.
Yes, so good. I'm so grateful po, Sir Lance, for attending this session. Grabe po. Para ako nag-a-attend ng seminar na parang tinitake ko talaga na para sa akin kasi teacher ako eh. Guilt, marami po akong guilt na nararamdaman today kung paano ko na-handle yung mga students ko. So siguro po yung mga nanonood na mga teachers ngayon, I know po marami din po silang natutunan. Pero may question po dito from Matthew Camos po. So the load should be enough to challenge the student without driving the student to point of overwork or frustration.
Yes po. So that's the goal that we want to achieve with cognitive load theory. So we are aware that certain students have different cognitive load. So yung iba mas madali po sila ma-overloaded. So our goal as teachers is to make sure that our lessons are just at that right spot when it's not too hard, because they might get frustrated and they may and the learning breaks down. Like for example, my student who got frustrated just threw away his paper, his work, and just continue to run around the classroom. If it's too easy, the student becomes bored. So and they don't learn because they already knew that. So there is a spot that is the best place for learning, and it's not just about overworking them, but making sure that they're not bored as well. So yes, the load should just be enough. And how can we do that? By making sure that our extrinsic load and our inherent load are just the same, are balanced with each other.
All right. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. And sure enough po, this adds to and reinforces our educators to come up a better strategy na hindi lang ma-provide yung need ng kanilang student but also exceed yung expectation ng mga ating mga magulang sa kanila pagdating sa pag-support sa atin. Ng kanilang mga anak, kahit physically away sila sa kanilang mga classroom. I also have one question here, sir. More like, yes, from one of our teachers, sabi po dito, can you give us what are the core values or skills po as SPED teacher should have or an educator should have?
Right. What I've learned in my work as an officer in a special education school is that one of the values we need to have is resilience and adaptability. So we mentioned back in the PowerPoint, we're talking about collaboration, adaptability, and a focus on our students. So it's important that we always need to have the student at the center of it all. That's why I prefer the term students with special needs rather than placing their disability first, because the student they may have special needs, but they have different personalities. So we need to be student-centered. We need to focus on them. We need to be adaptable so that when there are unexpected problems, like the student becomes violent, we can adapt. And we need to be collaborative. So I think Teacher Rubelin mentioned about we shouldn't be alone, that we should be working with other people. And that's really the key for special education. You don't have to shoulder the burden alone. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Thank you po.
So, yun. Thank you po. Ayan. So, kanina nga, di ba, binanggit natin yung term na whole school collaboration. So, hindi lang basta teachers yung in charge doon. Pwedeng pati yung administrative staff natin, pati security group, diba? Lahat ng parte ng school natin. And even, I think, pinaka-important din yung ating mga parents. So, basahin pa natin yung mga comments natin dito. So, from Ma'am Emma Enriquez Artates, thank you daw po, Sir Lance. And from Ma'am
Thank you
Lina,
po.
learn, and never stop learning. And sabi niya rin po, ni Ma'am Lina rin po na, thank you so much, Sir Lance. Great learning for today. And
Thank
again,
you
from
po
Miss
for coming.
Isang po, thank you, Lance, for sharing your knowledge with us. Passing this forward to our community of educators and learners is how we sustain the learning. Yan.
Very
So,
true
thank you
po.
po sa lahat ng mga nag-thank you sa ating chat box. So, baka may mga questions pa po kayong naiisip. You can comment your questions down here so we can answer that for you. So, nandito po yung ating speaker para sagutin po yung mga questions ninyo. Yan. So, marami pa po kayo sigurong mga takeaways. So, kung meron pa po kayong mga takeaways, type nyo lang po yan dito. Yan. So, ako may question ako, Sir Cabigas. Kasi meron di ba
Yeah.
mga talks for the past years na need daw ba na sa education curriculum, yung mga education students, let's say, for example, yung mga nagtitake ng Bachelor of Secondary Education,
Mm.
Bachelor of Elementary Education, kailangan ba na sila rin, meron silang course or subject related to special education? Kailangan ba lahat yun meron?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Ranyoko. No, I really feel that it should be. When I was still studying here, I actually argued for that during one of our lessons, wherein I believe special education or even inclusive education should be part of our professional courses. No, because when we enter a classroom, some special needs are not evident. No, they're actually invisible. So a student with who may have ADHD. So one of my students who have ADHD, I didn't see that at first, but I could, as the months went by, I could see that they had a special need, and that punishing them by telling them to sit down doesn't work. So I think it should be a requirement so that we can learn these strategies, no, to help make them more included, so that we don't we don't see their challenging behaviors as being rebellious or being disrespectful, but maybe it's just a cry for help. So I think it should be a part of it, and I hopefully in the near future we can see that happening in our curriculums.
Alright, so thank you. I think may question din si Ms. Zari for us, no? Ms. Zari, may
Yes.
question po ba kayo?
Yes po, I got one question right here. Ang sabi naman po niya, as an educator, Teacher Lance, how would you prioritize which special needs will you focus first in your classroom?
I actually thought about that when I first started working in a special education school. So when I looked at my classroom, and then I looked at my students and I asked, which one should I focus on? But I think there's something problematic with that belief that there should be a student to focus on. I think unfortunately teachers have to be very adaptable, that we can have lots of eyes inside the classroom, wherein when we're planning, we should be focusing on all students equally. Because what happens is, for example, if I'm focusing too much, which was a mistake I did, that I hope I was able to learn from when I first started working in a special school, that I focused too much on this student with reading difficulties. So he couldn't distinguish letters if they weren't big enough. So I focused too much on this kid, causing the other students to feel that they were being excluded. In fact, one of them came up to me and said, "You don't really talk to us that much." And that was a wake-up call, wherein, they were also part of my class, so why should I weigh them in different manners? So I think, to that question, ma'am, I think it's a skill to be learned, that we should have equal focus on all students all at the same time. Na meron tayong metaphorical mata sa likod ng mga ulo natin, and even around our heads.
Alright. It doesn't sound really easy, no, Teacher Lance? So, follow-up question, building on that po. Paano kayo nagde-distress sa ganyan? Kasi syempre nakakapagod, di ba? Ang dami mo kailangan i-consider. So, kayo po as an educator,
po.
what do you do po to distress po?
Yes. I actually experienced that, no? Na after a really rough day, na marami po akong sugat sa kamay nun, kasi kinagat po ako,
Grabe.
sinuntok, at lahat po niyan, di ba? Parang, nag-collection nga po ako ng mga sugat. So, and it's a really stressful time because now you begin to think, is it worth it? So, what I would advise teachers to do, especially those in a special education, would be to find a colleague that you trust and you talk to them about your experience. Because talking, some would say na, ano ba yan? I'm just wasting their time. No. Talking is a way for us to distress, to make sense of it all. Because of course naman, we're not allowed to really say our thoughts when we're with our kids. So distressing by talking to a friend helps us to get that perspective na, yeah, this is actually hard. It's not just in my head. My frustrations are valid. So talking helps our feelings to be validated. And probably another strategy is to think of the good things, no? Like yung bata na sobrang kinagat ako, siguro iba yung flavor ng balat ko. Sobrang kinagat niya ako. But I would think about the time when this kid, really severe autism, when he just went up to me and just hugged me, because that showed that he trusted me. So there are good days, there are bad days. Try to focus on the good days kung pwede pa.
Opo. Actually, yung friend ko po talaga is also a SPED teacher din po sa other country. And actually, sa amin din siya naglalabas ng kanyang mga frustrations, yung mga na-experience niya. Pero at the end of the day, naiintindihan din niya. Like you, sir, meron din siya mga
Definitely.
collections ng scars, kagat, sa bunot pa nga kasi mahaba yung buhok niya. So, ayun, sir. So, para sa mga educators natin, syempre, wag din po natin kakalimutan na isipin din naman natin yung ating mental health. Kasi sa
Very
atin
true.
din humuhugot yung ating mga students. Tama po ba, Sir Lance?
Yes po.
Thank you
Definitely.
very much po, Sir Lance, for your sharing. Teacher Nika, do you have anything else to say?
Ayan. So, I think ito na yung magiging last question natin for Sir Lance, no? So, may question po tayo dito. Kung meron daw po ba kayo sa inyo pong sariling practice, may mga Microsoft tools po ba kayo na ginagamit? Or kung ano po yung mga tools na to, baka pwede nyo pong i-recommend sa mga teachers po natin.
So I mentioned po, no, yung in terms of Microsoft, we actually use Microsoft 365, right? So Microsoft 365, wherein it's a suite wherein we're able to create this online collaborative documents that we can even ask the student to access. No? And the good thing about Microsoft Word Online is that we mentioned about the robustness, no, of the materials, is that it is easily ported regardless of the device. So whether it's on your phones or in the laptops, the transition, the way these texts are formatted are seamless regardless of the devices that you're using. So I think it's really good to use these online Microsoft Cloud applications, and even the applications you can see in your Windows devices, like the narrator, which reads out the text on the screen for the user, which can be very helpful for your student.
So, thank you po, Sir Lance. I think si Ma'am Rubilin, do you have any questions more? Takeaways po?
Ayan, so thank you once again, Sir Lance. May takeaways po ako, dami-dami po actually, no? So, I know it's very comprehensive po, pero yung ano ko talaga, inisip ko nga kasi nasa pandemic, no? So, yung ipinakita kasi ni Sir Lance, hindi lang siya pang teacher, kahit yung mga parents po, applicable po sa kanila. Yun kasi at this point of time, 1 year na. Okay, so sila yung naka-hands-on talaga sa mga anak po nila. So, very relevant po ang topic na ito. Congratulations po, Sir Lance, for sharing.
No problem po. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you po. Yan, mag-round of applause naman tayo sa chat box natin.
Ayan, there you go. At meron po dito, meron comment po si Teacher Lina Maiso. I still believe that learning starts at home. So to all parents here, our role to educate our child is very necessary. Let us help one another to mold the child, our children. Collaboration is important in education.
Very true.
Precisely. Ayan, so syempre po, pakinggan naman natin yung kabuuan din ng mga kaisipan pa ng ating mga participants at viewers this morning, di ba? So, may pa-mentimeter tayo ulit, Teacher Zari at Teacher
Yes, of
Mika,
course.
right?
Opo, hindi
Ayan.
hindi nawawala yan, Teacher Rubilin, syempre.
Of course, kasi interactive siya, di ba? So ngayon, pupunta na tayo. Yung mga viewers po namin, please po pakipunta po sa menti.com. Ayan, so kahit sa anong browser po, i-type nyo lang po yung www.menti.com and please use the code 38663322. Ayan, so Teacher Zari at Teacher Mika, I know po marami po silang ma-contribute this morning, no?
I'm pretty sure of that,
Yes.
Teacher Rubilin. Now, while waiting for our Mentimeter teachers, siguro, shout out muna natin yung mga nagko-comment sa ating comment section. Ayan. So, again, good morning daw po from Marites Dalay de Rosas. Ayan, nag-hashtag TechTalks, hashtag DepEd Edu 2021, Sulong Edukalidad. And then, good morning then from Teacher Armen Naitak Laban. Okay, so gusto ko rin po i-recognize pala, no? Meron palang mga supportive friend pala yung first speaker natin dito. So kay Sir AJ, thank you po for being with us also here today and for supporting our first speaker, Sir Lance. Ayan, no? Kayo po ba dyan? Meron po po kayong mga pa-shoutout dyan, teachers?
Ayan, tingnan natin. So, sino pa ba? Ayan, from Anna Welin Bakar. Kudos, great help for teachers na hindi SPED teacher like me. So, tama yan kasi sabi nga ni Sir Lance kanina, kahit hindi ka SPED teacher, hindi yun yung forte mo or specialization mo, kailangan lahat tayo. Meron tayong alam about inclusive and accessible education. So, tingnan pa natin. Baka Miss Rubilin, may nakita pa po kayong mga comments dito, mga shower out.
Shout out, yes.
Yes po, marami po eh. Ayan, si Miss Analo, sabi niya, thank you, Sir Lance, for sharing your expertise. Ayan, no? Then, yung ano pala, sabi nga dito ni Ma'am Glens Tagibaw, you can also use immersive reader features. Kasi nga kanina, may nagtanong po tungkol dun sa Microsoft tools po na pwedeng gamitin natin for special conditions po ng mga learners natin. So, yan, marami po. Like yung OneNote, may immersive reader po yan. Kahit yung ano natin, Microsoft Word 365.
Yes po,
Yeah.
meron.
Dami po. Ayan. So, sana yung Mentimeter natin maipakita na para naman makita natin yung pulso ng ating mga viewers. Ayan.
And here it is.
Wow, meron na nga. So, yung question dito, Teacher Mika, ano yung dapat po nilang gawin? Pakibasa po.
Ayan. So, sabi dito, rank the following. As educators, how can we ensure that we could provide students an inclusive online learning experience? Ayan. So, meron tayong tatlo dito. So, i-rank lang po natin yan. Ano ba yung mga choices natin, Ms. Zari?
So, first, we have frequent follow-up with parents/guardians. Next option is daily check-in with students, both for asynchronous and synchronous sessions. And last, we have weekly gathering of feedback, both from parents and students, with regards to online activities and sessions. So, for you teachers, ano po yung ranking ninyo dito sa tatlong ito? For sure naman po, lahat po ito, true enough, ito pong lahat ito ay napaka-importante. So, ano lang po yung mga priority nyo kayo as an educator dito sa mga options na ito or yung ginagawa nyo na, 'di ba?
Yes. So sa mga nag-online classes po, online distance learning, ayan, daily na parang it's good to monitor our kids either in synchronous or asynchronous way. Ang dami pong paraan. Kahit yung nagmo-modular din, pwede din
Opo.
naman nilang gamitin yung mga tools natin ng Microsoft o kahit anong educational tools para ma-reach out talaga yung mga bata para inclusive talaga. No child will be left behind.
Totoo.
Yes.
And later po, teachers, meron po tayong segment dito na magdadagdag pa doon sa mga applications na pwedeng-pwede nyong magamit sa inyong mga klase. Lalo na in supporting our students that need special needs pa po. Ayun, special support. So, hintayin nyo po iyon.
Yeah, kaya wag po
Stay
kayong
tuned.
aalis, marami pa pong mangyayari.
Totoo po yan. We are just getting started. The party is just getting started po, teachers.
Yes! At para mas lalo pa silang iinit, yung parang tumataas na yung level ng ng excitement po ng ating mga viewers. Teacher Zari, sino po ang ating pangalawang speaker?
Ay, ayan po. Sige po. So, I think Miss Mika would like to introduce our next speaker para sa
Ayan,
ating
sige.
mga viewers.
Ayan. So, yung ating second topic, syempre related dun sa first topic natin. So, kanina kasi educators yung focus natin, di ba? How educators can meet the needs of special education students. So, this time naman, for parents naman, dahil nga for all ito, gusto natin na mag-collaborate ang ating mga teachers at ang ating mga parents. Lalo na ngayon sa pandemic na yung mga estudyante natin nasa bahay pa, no? So, ang kasama nila lagi sa bahay ay yung mga parents at guardians nila. So this one naman po, our topic would be how parents can meet the needs of special education students in a remote learning setup. So napaka-special po at napaka-award-winning ng ating susunod na speaker. Siya po si Mrs. Christine V. Cannon. So siya po ay isa sa founding directors ng Creative Learning Path School, which is a progressive school. Ayan, so under her leadership, yung school po nila na-awardan po siya ng Excellence in Educational Transformation Award by Bayan Academy in 2017 para sa kanilang innovations sa peace education and inclusion. Isa rin po siyang faculty member ng College of Education ng De La Salle University at dati rin po siyang part ng faculty member ng Family, Life, and Child Development Department ng UP Diliman. And baka po may nakakakilala po sa inyo sa chat box natin kasi isa rin po siyang kilalang Filipino children's book writer. Na-awardan na po siya ng Salaga Writers Prize by the Philippine Board on Books for the Young in 2000. And hanggang ngayon po, nagpa-publish siya hindi lang ng mga children's books but also ng mga articles and journals. And lastly, isa po siyang court informator ng Teach Peace, Build Peace Movement. So, ayan. So, we welcome po natin ang ating very special speaker for today, si Mrs. Christine V. Cannon.
Good morning po.
Hello, good morning sa lahat. Peaceful morning sa lahat ng nanonood at nakikinig at gustong matuto sa araw na ito. Ayan. So, ang daming sinabi ni Lance na pati ako na-review. At pati ako natuto sa mga shinare ni Lance today, no? Pero yung siguro yung ibabahagi ko rin sa atin today is yung halaga ng ang pag-intindi sa mga individual na may special needs ay para sa lahat, hindi lang para sa mga magulang na may mga anak na may special needs, no? So yun ang siguro isa sa mga mensahe na gusto ko iparating sa ating lahat, no? So today I'm going to share with you how we can, if you are a teacher, how you can coach parents to meet the needs of their children in a remote learning setup, and or as a teacher, and how you can or if you are a parent, how you can help your child or empower your child. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, so it is really all about creating an inclusive home. Okay, so ang maganda siguro ang isipin natin lagi when we are creating inclusion or inclusive environments, yung sinasabi ni Lance kanina na inclusion is yung hindi natin siya dapat isipin na pang special needs lang yung inclusion. Okay? In fact, yung inclusion ay para sa lahat. It's really breaking down systems or barriers in the system, in our social systems, that exclude others. So, kasi hindi yun konsepto ng justice. So, kaya mahalaga yon sa atin na kailangan natin gawin yon. At bilang mga educator, bilang mga guro, para sa akin, personal primary duty ko yon. Okay, next slide please. Okay, so para maintindihan natin, no, gayon nga, hindi na nga natin masyado, ang isang bagong term na ginagamit for inclusion or for special needs is looking at it as, looking at people, everybody as neurodiverse, no? That we are neurodiverse, no? We know our classrooms are neurodiverse. Hindi ka kailangan ng disability or ng diagnosis para masabi na neurodiverse ka. We have students with different ways of learning. Next, please. Some call it disability. Next, please. Some call it special needs or exceptionality. Next, please. Some call it giftedness, learning difficulty. You know, maraming pangalan, di ba? Pero the fact is, we learn differently regardless of diagnosis. And the way we learn is actually as unique as our fingerprints, no? And this is very challenging for us teachers, no? I've been teaching for the past 20, 25 years already in special needs and in different settings from preschool until college. And mahirap siya, hindi siya madali. Hindi ko itatago sa inyo yung fact na yon na hindi ko, I will not paint a rosy picture of teaching special needs individuals. Si Lance ka kinakagat di ba? Physically threatening na sa kanya, no? It's very challenging and we in turn, we have to teach in many different ways, no? So ang nangyayari sa teacher pre-pandemic, next slide please, is that we teach in the way children learn. So, yung multiple tiers of support system na pinakita nila sa inyo kanina, another way of looking at it is really to see children individually na may iba-iba silang paraan ng pagkakatuto, no? Iba-ibang paraan. Yung iba magaling sa pagsusulat, yung iba magaling sa pagsasalita, yung iba magaling sa art, sa pagsayaw. Pero kailangan, bibigyan natin lahat ng pagkakataon para ipakita yung galing nila sa paraan na kaya nila, no? Kahit ano pa naman yung subject na tinuturo natin. So, it is a way for us to reach and teach everyone in the classroom. But this is in the classroom. And hindi siya madali in the classroom. Pero anong nangyari sa atin last year? Next slide, please. So last year, the pandemic struck, no? And our teaching regimen was severely disrupted. And tayo, we are actually first responders, no? We knew that learning had to continue. This was the mandate of our secretary. And as they say, ang nangyari sa atin, we are building the plane while trying to fly it, no? But we all have a piece. As teachers, as parents, we all knew a part of what we knew what to do. Some of us knew pedagogy. Some of us were content experts, knew our subjects very well. Some of us were great at technology. And while some of us were very good at relationship building, we had parts. But putting them together into a cohesive whole was difficult as we tried our best while facing everyday challenge. Kasi alam nyo, we were doing this, but personally, ako hindi bilang teacher, ako bilang nanay, bilang asawa, bilang kapatid, bilang anak, iniisip ko, nakakatakot yung COVID. Iniisip ko, baka mawalan ako ng trabaho or hindi ako susweldo. Inisip ko, maraming problema. You know, all these mental health issues, no? So we were facing health fears of COVID. We were facing economic meltdowns and mental breakdowns. Tama ba ako? Naramdaman nyo ba yan, ha? So kung naramdaman nyo yan, you can type it in the chat box, no? Na bet ko yan, na andyan din ako, no? Gets ko yan. Okay. So kasi ganyan ang pandemic teaching, di ba? Talagang yan ang nararanasan nating lahat, no? So, hindi siya madali. Pero lagi kong iniisip na kailangan ba madali? No? Kailangan ba madali? Kasi minsan, ang tanong dapat is, mahirap ba o mahalaga ba ito? Okay. Yung ginagawa ba natin mahirap? Yes. Pero mahalaga ba ito? Yes din, di ba? So, kailangan natin gawin at ipagpatuloy. So, anong nangyari sa atin? Next slide, please. COVID-19 pushed education to evolve at a pace we cannot keep up with. All of a sudden, teachers needed to be tech experts and module writers, diba? And all of a sudden, parents needed to be teachers and therapists. Parehong role. So, kung nafu-frustrate tayo, mga teachers, sa mga parents na makukulit, sa mga parents na mainit ang ulo, sa mga parents na impatient, or biniblame tayo na, ba't ako na teacher yung gumagawa ng homework? Or bakit teacher, ako na yung naggagawa ng lesson, di ba? Yan ang mga binabato sa atin ngayon ng mga magulang. Tandaan natin na nanggagaling yun, it's coming from a place of unpreparedness. Di ba? Galing yun doon. So, ako kasi philosophy ko yan eh. Kapag merong taong, alam niyo yung laging galit, yung parang galit sa mundo, yung ganon, ang ibig sabihin nun, it's a cry for help. And our children, actually, especially those with special needs who are nonverbal, who have limited capacity of expressing their emotions, is that nahihirapan din sila i-express yun, that I need help. So kapag yung parents natin ay stressed, it's a call for help, no? Nahihirapan silang sabihin, I need help. Kasi stress sila. Next slide, please. Ito na tayo ngayon eh. Ganda, di ba? yan na itsura natin lahat ngayon, no? This is the state that parents and teachers are currently in. We are just simply exhausted from running on adrenaline. We are fueled by our fight or flight response in trying to keep things together or as normal as possible in the new normal. Pero we all have worries that fill our days, di ba? Stress is real and I will not hide it from you. And our parents, what are they worried about? What are we worried about muna as teachers, no? So, ganyan ka din ba? Are you feeling the brunt of the burden? Yeah, I know. Ganyan talaga tayo lahat, no? So, what are we worried about? Next slide, please. So, we worry about our children with neurodiversities having no access to proper learning services, to a set routine, to a proper curriculum. Kasi alam natin tayo yung nakakaalam. Alam natin tayo yung experts, no? We are worried that parents and caregivers will be limited in their capacity to help their own children, no? And these kids, these children with neurodiversities, they thrive on the structure of the school day. They need us teachers, they need us educators, and sometimes they need us physically to handhold them, di ba? So may ganun eh. No worry tayo that these kids are less able to benefit from the social interaction that is found in school because clearly there's no true substitute for group play with peers. Even yung screen interaction that we are engaging in right now, I am engaging in with you right now, is not enough. Although I'm very, very thankful for technology. Imagine kung saan-saan kayo galing from Bulacan, Cebu. Dami ko nang napuntahan. Today pa lang, no? In 20 minutes, ang dami ko nang napuntahan. It brings us together, so we take full advantage of that. Now, we also worry about parents having no time kasi they have to work, they have no energy, they have no resources or aptitude to provide for their child who is neurodiverse. Ito yung worries natin, no? So we worry about the children, we worry about learning loss. We fear learning loss. Bakit? Siyempre tayo as teachers, meron tayong standards for teaching, no? Meron tayong mga requirements na we have to fulfill. Meron tayong grade point averages that we have to keep our students at for our budgets to stay there. So, mahirap. Mahirap yung trabaho natin. Hindi siya biro, di ba? Kasi all we want to do is to care for our students. But we have to think about these other things. Ano naman yung wino-worry ng parents? Tignan natin. Next slide, please. But our parents are worried that their children have no access to learning services. Wala silang therapy, wala silang SPED class, they have no access to a set routine. Yung alam na nila na hahatid nila yung anak nila sa eskwelahan, tapos meron na silang ibang pwede gawin. Kasi habang nasa school yung bata, makaka-function sila. Di ba? Makakatrabaho sila, pero ngayon nawala yun. No? And iiwan nila yung mga anak nila sa trained teachers, sa teachers who know what to do with their kids, no? At tayo yon. So ngayon nawala yon. So ganun kagrabe yung stress levels ng parents, no? Ganun kagrabe yung insecurity nila. They worry about that their children are less able to benefit from social interaction found in school. Paano nila i-explain sa batang may autism na hindi niya makikita yung mga kaklase niya today? Paano kung yung kailangan ng bata yon na makita yung kaklase niya para magkalma siya? May ganon. Di ba? So, nawawala yon, no? Parents worry that they themselves, wala akong time para gawin to. Kailangan kong kumita ng pera. Di ba? Wala akong energy to do this. Hindi ako gaya ni teacher kasi may kaalaman siya. Wala akong resources, no? Wala akong materials that are available in school. Wala akong kakayahan, no? To provide for my child who is neurodiverse. Ito ang nararamdaman ng parents. Next slide. And they fear regression. They fear, naku, lalala ang condition ng anak ko. Yan. Yan ang greatest fear nila ngayon. Hindi lang COVID. Especially parents of children with neurodiversities, they fear that their children will regress. Nakakatakot naman talaga yun. Imagine mo, lahat ng tinrabaho mo for the past 2 years, pwedeng mabura. Di ba? Pwedeng mawala in an instant. And so they fear that. Kasi these kids thrive on routine. They thrive on structure. They need a schedule. And any disruption to the schedule puts them at risk for a delay or for a regression. Next slide, please. What do they worry about? Let's talk about these kids with neurodiversities. May feelings po sila, di ba? May opinion po sila kasi tao po sila. Anong fear nila? Anong feeling nila? Bakit hindi ako makalabas? They worry that they can't go out and do the things that they were used to. Bakit? Ba't hindi ako pwede lumabas? Yun ang lagi nila iniisip. Tapos, paano kung routine nila yung lumalabas? Diba? Kasama sa routine nila that helps them self-regulate yung paglabas. And hindi nila pwede gawin yon. They are worried that they can't recognize people wearing masks. I've heard a lot of stories na yung bata nagagalit kapag nakamask yung magulang niya. Kasi hindi niya makita kung sino yun, no? So, it stresses them. It causes anxiety that when we are wearing masks, nagkakaproblema, 'di ba? In fact, sa domain ng mga hearing impaired, those who lip read, kailangan ang teacher and therapist nakasuot ng clear mask para they can still lip read. no? May ganong accommodation. Kids with neurodiversities worry that they might get COVID. Kasi syempre yung comprehension or yung cognitive skills nila, hindi na pareho sa atin, no? They will understand it in different ways. So, takot sila, makulong sila kung they fail to follow hand washing or social distancing. So, meron tayong kids right now who are obsessed with hand washing. You can't stop them from washing hands. Kasi yun yung sinabi. Yung they follow to a T. Gets nyo ba? If you are a teacher with special needs and if you are in constant communication with parents, this is what's happening in the field. This is what's happening in the real world. No? Meron tayong parents who find it problematic, the social distancing, to practice social distancing of their children. No? Kasi, for example, ang hearing impaired, kailangan nalilip read niya. So pag malayo, mahihirapan siya makita yung mata tsaka yung bibig. 'Di ba? May mga challenges na ganon. And these kids have valid feelings. Okay? Hindi natin pwede i-invalidate yung feelings nila na parang, di bale, mag-get over din niya yan kasi matatapos din ng COVID. Hindi po pwede natin sabihin yon. Oo, totoo yon, matatapos ang COVID. Pero yung mag-get over nila, ay hindi natin ho alam kung sino lang po ang makaka-get over. Kasi may trauma po na nangyayari ngayon. Pati sa atin, no? Pati sa atin na walang special needs. Okay. So, what are they afraid of? Next slide. They fear the unknown. And kids with neurodiversities actually fear the unknown even prior to the pandemic. Default nila yan eh. If they don't know what's gonna happen, if they don't know what to expect, may fear of the unknown na kagad sila. And this leads to our systems, parents, teachers, children, our students, the entire school community system. It's overwhelmed. Lahat tayo. Are you overwhelmed? Okay? Are you overwhelmed? Can you name your top stressor right now? Ano yung top stressor mo that overwhelms you? Sige, type nyo lang yan dyan. Tignan ko kung what overwhelms you. Ano nakaka-stress, no? Deadline, LAS, WHLP ba yun? Weekly Home Learning Plan. Di ba? O kaya yung parents na tawag ng tawag, o parents na sumasagot ng module, di ba? Ano yung nakaka-overwhelm? Panggastos. Okay? Nakaka-overwhelm. Lumabas. Kailangan mong bumili. Ano yung nakaka-overwhelm sa'yo ngayon? Identify it. It's really important na tayo, kaya natin i-identify yon. Kasi once we are able to identify what stresses us as individuals, can we be able to move forward from it? So, kailangan natin i-recognize yon, that it is a valid feeling, it is a real emotion. Feeling overwhelmed, no? We are there, and it's okay. Dami nating kailangang technology na kailangan aralin, nakaka-overwhelm. Diba? Parang, kailangan ko aralin lahat yan, TikTok lang alam ko. Okay? Or Facebook lang kaya ko. Diba? Pero ngayon, ang fantastic no? Ang bilis. Ang dami. And nakakatuwa, nakaka-overwhelm yon. And aren't you glad Microsoft is here, no? Partnering with us to provide us with the information we need. Diba? Ano pa? Marami tayong kailangan module writing nga eh. Problema na rin ng teacher, how to communicate with parents. Kasi hindi mo nakikita ang parents ngayon. Or makikita mo sila pagka magpipick up ng modules or magsasubmit, no? Pag-create ng video lessons, nakaka-overwhelm. Totoo yun. Una sa lahat, lalo na kung mahiyain kang tao, self-conscious ka, no? Mahirapan ka talaga gumawa ng video lesson. Nakaka-overwhelm, nakaka-stress, no? Tapos nun, ilang take yung gagawin mo. Uulit-ulitin mo. No? Kaya nakakaingit yung mga vlogger Ang confident. Di ba? Ang confident nila. They can create content in an instant, no? Yan. We are overwhelmed. Okay. So marami, no? Work, pressure, bahay, kids at home. We're still parents. We are still husbands. We are still wives. We are still, brothers. We are still sisters. Meron tayong kamag-anak na may sakit. Meron tayong, di ba? Meron tayong ganun And we have bills to pay. So, nakaka-overwhelm lahat ito. So, anong gagawin natin? Magpapaka-overwhelm na lang ba? Ito lang gagawin na lang natin. Okay. So, next slide, please. Pause muna. Okay. Pause muna tayo. The only way to get rid of negativity is to replace it with more productive or thinking or helpful thinking. What is helpful to you? Makakatulong ba sa'yo ngayon kung ma-overwhelm ka? Makakatulong ba sa'yo ngayon kung iisipin mo, ay, grabe, dami kong trabaho. Ay, grabe, dami kong kailangan gawin. Diba? Wag na. Hindi yan essential. Tanggalin, wag pakinggan. Let's focus first on developing yourself. Not just your physical or your immune system with vitamins. Dapat ginagawa mo talaga yun at this day and age of COVID. But our mental and emotional system. And Miss Isa talked about this earlier on when she expressed the need for empathy. And empathy is something that you can practice if you know first to empathize with yourself. If you are in touch with your own emotions. If you can reflect on your own overwhelmness, on your own feelings, no, and what you are going through. If you recognize it, if you acknowledge your emotions, that it exists. Hindi yung binabaon mo sa trabaho, binabaon mo sa alak, binabaon mo sa limot. Hindi. That won't work. Lalabas at lalabas yun. It will leak out from you, from your body, as a form of illness, because that's how stress works, no? So recognize first the emotions you're feeling, get in touch with it, but don't stay there, okay? Don't stay there. You have to move forward. And how do you do that? Next slide, please. You have to make time to care for yourself. Okay. So remember kanina, we were building the plane as we are flying it, di ba? Ngayon, we can't be good builders or collaborators with others if our cups are not full. Okay? If we are coming from an empty cup. Okay. You want to serve your children? As a parent, you want to be a better, a happier, a calmer, more effective parent. Then take better care of yourself. Make time to care for yourself. Self-care muna. How do you do this? No, ako, morning routine ko, gising ako ng 6:30 a.m. Prayer, meditation, and then I take coffee kasi tahimik. Walang pang gising, ako lang. So, na-enjoy ko yon. Yun yung quiet time ko. No? Na akin lang yon. Hindi man kasama asawa ko. So, akin lang yun. That's how I take care of myself. It can be a cup of coffee. It can be a longer bath time. It can be reading a book. It can be watching videos, watching TikTok videos. Whatever makes you feel good, do it. Okay? As long as it doesn't hurt another person. Okay? So, whatever makes you feel good, do it, no? Set aside a time block in your day where you will do this and commit to it. And this is when you do this, you also commit to making yourself more effective as a professional and more effective as a family member. Care for yourself. Pause muna, me muna. Okay. And then, next slide. accept who you are in the situation. Hindi mo maaaral lahat ng technology that's available. Hindi mo kayang maging expert sa lahat ng yun. Okay? So, one at a time. Pick one that you can do, yung pinakamadali, and then practice it. Pag mastered mo na yon, na kaya mo nang gawin ng nakapikit, kaya mo na mag-flip grid ng nakapikit, then pwede ka na mag-next. Sige, pick another tool. No? That's how you do it. Do it in a manageable way. No? Accept who you are. Don't judge yourself or compare yourself with others. Parang, naku, yung kabilang district, ang galing nila, lahat nagagawa na nila, ganyan. Hayaan mo sila. Okay? Do what you can where you can. Okay? Don't compare yourself against standard set. And as parents naman, we don't do it also with our kids. You can't. As parents of special needs, you cannot compare your kids against the norm, against the standards, diba? You will set them up for failure if you do so. So wherever or whatever is your starting point, it is a step towards something better. Remember, next slide, I am enough, no? You are enough. Whatever you are going through, whatever steps you are taking, it's enough. Believe that you are enough, and when you know you are enough, then you can make a difference. Pag alam mo na, okay, eto yung kakayahan ko, bibigay ko to, i-share ko to. Ganon lang. Diba? Ganon tayo eh. Alam niyo yung paniniwala ko, tayong mga teacher, tayong mga educator, our hearts grow bigger every day to make room for more children, to occupy our hearts. So hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na hindi ko na kaya yan kasi ang dami ko nang minamahal, ang dami ko nang ginagawa, or ang dami ko nang sinuserve, 'di ba? Or every year you meet new students and your heart grows bigger to make space, and that's the concept of inclusion. It's making space for everyone. Okay? That's how I believe inclusion to be. It's really making space for every person. Okay, next slide, please. So, are you ready? Yan. Are you ready to make our homes, to encourage our HLPs, our home learning partners, to make their homes more inclusive for these pandemic times? Are you ready? If you are ready, type it in the chat box now. I'm ready to be inclusive. Go ahead. Go ahead. Ready na ako, Teacher Tin. Ready to be inclusive. I am enough. I am ready. Yan. Yan ang mga hashtag natin ngayon, di ba? Yan ang mga ilalagay natin ngayon. Yan ang mga mantra natin ngayon. Gusto nyo mag-thrive? Ready ka dapat. Ready ka to be inclusive. I'm ready to make space, you know, for someone who's marginalized, for someone who's excluded. Ready to be inclusive. Okay. All right. So, yun ang gagawin natin. That's the first step. The first step in creating an inclusive environment, whether it's school or home, is your mindset. No? It's really your mindset. Inclusion is all about a belief system, a philosophy in life. Kung naniniwala ka na dapat lahat ng bata may access sa education, sa quality education, kahit may disability, kahit may autism, kahit may ADHD, o kung ano man pang diagnosis, then dapat yun ang gagawin natin. Diba? Paniniwala yun eh. It's a value that you hold dear to your heart. And when you hold it dear to your heart, lalabas yun in your actions. Hindi dahil it's a mandate. Hindi dahil it's a law, but more because it's a moral obligation to humankind. So that's how I see it, no? And ang laki, di ba? Parang laki ng pangarap ko masyado. changing the world, di ba? Yun yung pangarap ko, no? But we do it one child at a time. And in these pandemic times, we now do it one family at a time. Kasi we now work with parents. Ang parents, katuwang na natin ngayon, no? Ang mga magulang. Kahit ayaw natin silang katuwang, kasi pwedeng nakakainis. Or parang ang parents naman on the other end, kahit ayaw niyong katuwang yung teacher, kasi nakakainis, kasama po yun, no? We have to forge those partnerships to make things work for our children and their future. So we start by creating that inclusive home. Okay, next slide, please. So the first thing to ask is, what's it like in the home environment? Okay. Alamin natin, no? And parents should communicate this with the special ed teachers or with the teachers of the school. Ano ba yung sinasabi dito? Meron akong mga alam ng mga DepEd teachers natin. Grabe yung dedication nila, no? That they do home visitations, no? Ganun yung ginagawa nila. So kailangan alamin natin anong setup ng parents. Nasa bahay lang ba sila o lumalabas sila? Will they be working while at home? Kung nasa bahay sila, are they working at home? Kasi baka mamaya nasa bahay sila pero kailangan nilang mag-report sa trabaho. Yung tipong yung boss nila, kailangan nakikita sila sa camera. Di ba may ganon? Or kailangan may oras ng araw na nakikita sila ng boss nila sa camera. Is internet available? Tama ba yun? Parang meron access? Meron ba silang, yung mga bata ba may device that they can use? Is it a phone? Is it a tablet? Is it a laptop? Kung laptop man siya, anong version? Diba? Kailangan alamin natin yon. Is there space in the home to set aside for gross motor or sensory activities? So this is one thing that we also have to consider. Kung masikip or maliit ang bahay, maaaring sa labas gawin ang gross motor or sensory activities. Now, based on these questions, no, konti pa ng questions, no, mas marami pa yan. As teachers, we map out the plan, okay? The individualized educational plans of the students, we map it out according to what's available, according to the resources that's available. Ang tawag dito, curriculum modification. So, ang curriculum modification and learning accommodations, usually nakikita natin yan na ginagawa ng special ed teacher kapag gumagawa siya ng individualized educational program for every student who is diagnosed and is in the mainstream or is in the special school, no? Ngayon, mag-iiba ang mukha ng IEP kasi kailangan mo na rin i-consider ang resources na available sa bahay. Okay. So, we now have to include parents' schedules, internet connections, and so on, no? We partner with the parent to make things work, and that's part of the intervention that we do. So as parents, we have to share the information with our teachers. Huwag tayo mahihiya. Kung may limitation sa bahay, we need to express it, no? And syempre, teachers, huwag naman tayo mag-judge, di ba? Kanya-kanya yan eh, di ba? No? It's critical to the development of the plans that you will create for your children with neurodiversities. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So, ang susunod is yung work from home or learn from home setup. Ano na itsura niya? Okay, tignan natin. Meron ka dapat assigned space for your work from home setup. Okay. Yung assigned space mo for working talaga. Ngayon, meron ka ring assigned time at home for work-related matters. So, if it's school matters, naka-schedule din siya. The first and primary consideration is really your space. What kind of spaces are available at home? Ngayon, kung wala kayong pwedeng dedicated space na, okay, dito lang tayo mag-aaral. Kasi sa special learners, ideal yon. Kasi sanay sila na pupunta sila sa school and may dedicated space where they can move, where they can learn, where they can do things, no? So sa bahay, kailangan may ganun din na para maintindihan nila yon. An alternative that you can do is to dedicate space or markers, no? Put some markers. Next slide, please. So ang pwede gawin is instead of focusing on, ay teacher, hindi namin pwede gawin yan kasi lit lang ng bahay namin eh, ganyan-ganyan, no? Think about creating consistency. Yun yung mas importante. Dedicate a corner of the room, or pwede siyang kitchen table na pag itong schedule na to, itong oras na to, nagko-convert siya into assignment time. Okay? So, lalagyan nyo ng labels yung areas ng bahay nyo. Halimbawa, making area, pwedeng sa kitchen. Painting area, pwedeng sa labas kasi baka makalat, di ba? So, may ganun. O kaya per subject, math and language, pwede sa sala para nakaupo. Okay. Geometry, so, kunwari, or math, pwedeng sa kusina uli kasi maraming pwedeng i-measure doon. Di ba? So, a dedicated space is ideal, but if space is limited, ang advice ko is to put markers on areas used for specific tasks. You can also create a home box or a homeschooling box or a toolkit that contains all the materials na ginagamit for school. So, kung nasaan yung box, doon yung workspace ninyo. Okay? So, yan yung pwede gawin sa bahay. As teachers, ang ginawa namin sa school is we really advise parents to do this. No? We coach parents. So ngayon, ang nangyayari, therapists and SPED teachers are now learning coaches for parents, no, na who don't feel confident in addressing their kids' neurodiversities. Okay, so when we are designing space or workspaces for the children, what do we need to consider naman, no? So aside from this, so pwede siyang space na may upuan, may study table, yan, maganda talaga yon kung pwede yon. Or pwede siyang learning box, or pwede siyang may dedicated space markers around the house. Kailangan visual. Yun yung importante, lalo na for our kids who have special needs, na merong yung iba sa kanila may communication limitations, so visuals are important to them. So we need to do that. Okay, next slide, please. So think about how the child likes to learn and engage with the world. No? Is the child an active one? Kung yung bata ay laging kitikite, no? Kailangan lagi siyang gumagalaw, umiikot, hindi siya pwedeng nakaupo lang. No, hindi niya kayang nakaupo for long periods of time. And so, wag niyo pilitin na kailangan naka-ergonomic chair siya tapos study table. Pwede siyang mag-work ng nakahiga. Pwede siyang mag-work ng nakasalampak. Pwede siyang kung ano yung komportable sa kanya. Kasi that will minimize the movement and that will help him focus on the task. Okay? Ngayon, kung yung bata kaya niya mag-sit for long periods of time, edi by all means, provide a study table and a chair. Does the child like quiet spaces? Do they like sound engagement with soft music? Pwede ka mag-play ng background music or background noise kung kaya nila yon or kung type nila yon if they find it calming. Or kailangan quiet talaga. Walang ibang noise, no? Meron pa nga akong alam na mga situations na kinakailangan nilang mag-soundproof ng closet sa bahay para walang distraction. No? May mga gumagawa ng ganon. Anong colors? What colors do they like? Or what characters do they like? Animals? What do they find exciting? Superheroes? Put little decorations of those things that they like because that gives them a sense of this is my space, may ownership. This is my place to learn. It's for me. And kapag meron silang ganon, meron silang aside from nakakakilig yun, they feel special already, di ba? They feel also that they are empowered to use that space for what they need. No? May halaga. There is importance in what they are doing each day. Do they need a lot of options of supplies close by, or are they better with less crowded spaces? So, for halimbawa, kung yung bata is the type na madali ma-distract, kinakailangan malapit yung mga kagamitan. Malapit dapat ang crayons, ang pens, ang papers. Kasi kung tatayo siya at kukunin yon, baka hindi na bumalik yon. Kasi kung ano-ano nang gagawin niya, na-distract na siya. Di ba? Pero, kung kailangan niya ng movement, yung bata, kailangan naman niya ng movement, pero hindi siya mabilis ma-distract, di pwede mo gawin yon na kailangan pupunta siya dito sa cabinet na to para kunin yung scissors, pupunta siya sa cabinet na to para kunin yung paper, ganyan. Or kailangan walang distractions, hindi cluttered yung itsura na maraming gamit na nakapatong sa table. Depende sa bata yon. So, this is where individualization happens. No, you have to consider it. Do they like seclusion to focus, or are they okay with open areas? Meron akong kilala, gumawa siya ng yung trifold folder, a board pala, para hindi siya madidistract sa iba. No? Hindi siya madidistract sa ibang bagay. Para may seclusion siya. Kasi kailangan niya secluded para makakoncentrate siya. Okay. So, yun yung isa sa ito yung mga kinoconsider natin. By thinking about the learning needs of your child, you will be able to cut out a lot of unnecessary items that you think you need. You really don't need a lot to have a successful learning space in your home. No? If only we listen to our kids. Now, merong triggers in the home that are not available in school. No? Halimbawa, meron akong case na kapag umuulan, nadidistract yung bata. Okay. Tapos, ang ginagawa namin, pag nasa school siya, kasi narinig niya yung, or may bintana, kitang-kita niya yung ulan, nadidistract siya, we had to cover the windows para hindi siya madidistract ng ulan. So, may mga ganung things, no? Triggers yun eh. So, kailangan i-address nyo rin yung triggers. What triggers your child? Mahirap lang kapag manok nung kapitbahay yung nagtitrigger dun sa bata eh. Kikidnapin mo na lang one day siguro. De, joke lang. Ay, may question tayo dito. How can learning spaces be dedicated for students with special needs who live in not so spacious homes, especially those who are indigent? Yeah, kaya ang sinusuggest ko talaga is to have a learning box. A traveling learning box, na yung kung nasaan yung box na yon, doon ang learning space nyo. Okay? So, yun yung magkikreate ng consistency. Kapag nakita ng bata yung box na yon na may pangalan niya, let's say, Jose's School Box. Diba? Yun yung signal niya na, okay, ito ang learning space ko for today. Okay, so I hope that answered that question. Okay. Next slide, please. Remember that less is always more. Okay? Too many toys, books, supplies can crowd a space and create a feeling of chaos. Likewise, kapag maraming gamit na nakalabas sa kusina, ganun din yon. Pag maraming gamit na nakaka-clutter, nagiging this source of distraction siya. Hindi sa lahat ng bata. So depende po 'yan doon sa bata, no? So this is in general, pero depende doon sa coping skills ng bata. Okay. So kailangan you declutter the space, you remove distractions, you have materials ready and design according to the child's interests. Those are 4 things that you need to do in structuring the learning space or in creating a learning box that will travel, that will be used for as your designated spot for learning wherever you are in the house, or you take it with you kung aalis man kayo, kung lilipat ng kung minsan kasi 'di ba may setups tayo na kapag nasa bahay ng lola, kapag weekend, may mga ganun tayong lugar. So pwedeng dadalhin siya. Okay. Next slide please. So that space. Next is set limits, no? Ano yung limits natin, no? Ako rin po ay parent ng children with special needs, pero malalaki na kasi sila ngayon. So I have 2 boys with hearing impairment. One is profoundly deaf, and the other one is hearing impaired, wearing hearing aids. Pero may mga learning disabilities po sila, kaya kinakailangan kong i-structure yung bahay, no? So when we were setting limits nung nag-pandemic, sabi ko, kailangan kasi wala nang line na parang pag nasa bahay ka, pwede kang gumising ng kung anong oras mo gusto, pwede kang pumasok sa online class nang hindi naliligo, pwede kang, 'di ba? Pwedeng nakapaa ka lang, hindi mo kailangang magbihes, 'di ba? May mga ganun no. Tapos since nandito rin sila sa bahay, yung gawaing bahay nagiging mas mabigat. Kasi nandito sila Hindi gaya dati na buong araw wala sila sa bahay. So pagkalinis sa umaga, okay na. Maayos yung bahay the whole time. Maayos yung mga kwarto nila. Ngayon na nandito sila, gumugulo, no, yung itsura. So we have to do it democratically. No, okay. So we set limits, we apply democracy, and we accept any answer. So ang una kong ginawa sa kanila, nag-meeting kami. Na okay, napansin ko, ito yung nangyayari sa atin, nagkakaproblema tayo dito. Okay, ano yung pwede nyong itulong? So, tinanong ko sila. Tapos, yung tulong na sinasabi nila nung una, kasi mga bata, mga teenager, alam niyo yung tulong na parang kung ano lang maisip. Sige, ma'am, pwede akong pwede akong magbaba ng labada. Sa loob-loob ko, bababa mo yung labada, hindi mo palabhan. So, ganun yung isip ko. So, hinayaan ko lang sila. I accepted all their answers and the help that they wanted to pitch in. Kung ano yung sinabi nila, yun lang yung tinanggap ko. And then, I stepped in with my expectations. Na, kailangan gigising kayo ng maaga. Kailangan aayusin niyo yung hinigaan nyo, yung tinulugan nyo. Kailangan you have to keep your rooms clean, yung bathroom, ang banyo kailangan lagi malinis kasi lagi natin ginagamit. Kailangan may oras ka para sa aral, no? At sa paggawa ng mga gawaing bahay. Okay. 'Di ba? So ito yung limits, no, na sinasabi ko na hindi pwedeng they are free to do what they want. Most especially, kids with special needs, neurodiverse kids, kailangan nila ng limits. Kailangan nila ng boundaries or ng routine. Okay. Next slide, please. Establishing a routine that mimics the school day is actually a great start. So, di ba sa school may routine na meeting time muna, tapos nun merong activity, tapos may snack, tapos nun merong reading time, tapos nun merong writing time, may art, tapos may lunch time, yung nakaganon. Gagawa rin kayo ng routine schedule nyo para sa bahay. Agree on the time for each activity, especially if the child is more able, kung verbal yung bata, kailangan i-include nyo yung bata sa pagplano or paggawa ng routine. Set up a time for waking up, making bed, cleaning room, other chores. Okay, other things that they can do to help in the house. Importante po yun. Agree on a time for meals to be shared together. Sabay-sabay kumain. Kung kailangan, pwede rin sabay-sabay na nagdadasal. Next slide, please. Create your schedule. It's important to put visual reminders. No, create your schedule visually, and try at best to replicate their schedule pre-pandemic. Yung kung anong ginagawa sa school, kokopyahin nyo yun sa bahay. And then you incorporate the IEP skills into the day. So halimbawa, nakalagay doon sa lesson ni teacher na binibigay sa inyo, kinakailangan mag-movement exercise muna siya bago siya mag-writing activity. So, papasok nyo yun doon sa schedule niya na may exercise muna siya, pwedeng mag-just dance video, susundan niya yon, or push-ups against the wall, whatever it is, kung anong recommend ng therapist o ng teacher, and then gagawin niya yon. Make it visual. May mga families na gumagamit ng timer, kahit yung sa phone na timer, para tumimik yung school bell. Kasi hinahanap ng mga bata, no? So create a to-do list and a corresponding rewards if needed. If some kids still work on rewards, then you have to give it to. Okay, there's a comment here that in some public schools, actually in a lot, kids climbed up trees just to be able to get a strong internet signal. Oo nga. Ano bang comment ko dyan? Actually, kung isipin nyo, maganda yung climbing trees, ha? Yes, it is risky. And I'm not encouraging risky behavior in children. But it is a gross motor task that they are doing as well. But keeping their balance and staying for long periods of time up in a tree is not healthy for them. Unfortunately, if they are climbing a tree for pleasure, that's okay. But if they are climbing a tree in order to study, that's reality that bites. No, masakit. But we do what we have to do. Okay. Next slide, please. So, anong sample? Okay, gumawa ko yung family schedule namin na para alam din ng mga bata kung kailan kami pwede maistorbong mag-asawa kasi work from home kami. So, yung bunso ko, 8 years old siya, tapos lahat teenager na yung iba kong anak. So, tong schedule na to, galing to sa mga opinion nila. Sila din yung nagbigay ng activities na gusto nilang ipasok. So, hindi ako yung nagdi-dictate. Okay? Importante na hindi natin ipipilit kung ano yung gusto natin sa mga bata. Pakinggan po natin sila. Iga-guide lang naman natin sila at ng tanong, di ba? Yung gusto mo ba ay makakatulong sa pamilya? Oo o hindi. So kapag hindi yung sagot, kailangan niya mag-isip ng iba na makakatulong. Di ba? Kasi stuck tayo at home as a family So, kung pang sarili lang yung sinusuggest niya, baka kailangan niyang mag-isip ng ibang paraan para ma-address yung pangangailangan ng lahat. Okay, so merong family schedule. Next slide, please. Gumawa din ako para dun sa mas bata. Kasi yung mas bata, kailangan niya ng makita per hour kung ano yung expected sa kanya, expected behavior. So this is tapos siya ang gumawa ng visuals, no? Nag-drawing siya na paano ba yung pagkagising niya, pag-ayos ng higaan niya, pagkain ng breakfast, tsaka pagtulong sa gawaing bahay. So siya ang gumawa ng visuals niyan, yung pinakabunso ko. So katulong ko din siya sa paggawa ng schedule, sa pag-decide ng kung anong mauunang activity. At kung mapapansin ninyo, meron siyang gadget time, no? Ang rule ko sa bahay is yung paglaro sa phone or sa gadget, pinapayagan ko lang yan kapag marunong na magbasa yung bata. Okay? Kasi hindi ho ginawa ang gadget para sa maliliit na bata, no? Ito, ang mga gadget ay ginawa actually, dinesign ang technology para sa adults. So, lahat ng technology na meron tayo should be guided by the adults when used by young children. Okay? So, kaya lahat yan, ganyan. So, Next slide, please. So yung bunso ko, pinagtrabaho ko siya sa bahay, tumutulong siya sa mga gawaing bahay, kasama yon sa routine niya. At malaking tulong ito sa pagbuo ng pagkatao, no? Independent life skills ito na kinakailangan matutunan ng bawat bata hanggang sa pagtanda. Next slide, please. Okay, what does learning from home look like, no? So, merong tayong milks na dinesign ng ating kagawaran that acts as our guiding principle in creating academic learning, di ba? For reading, math, science, writing practice, ganyan. Pero dahil may online learning tayo or may modular na yung iba kasi, yung remote areas talaga ngayon, purely modular sila no? Kailangan lalagyan natin ng opportunities to practice yung mga social skills, no? Or what you call digital citizenship. Okay. Now, it can be making comments in the chat box or using the microphone, muting and unmuting. Kailan ginagawa yon? Kasi ang isang tanong na lagi lumalabas, teacher, tama ba na minumute mo yung mga estudyante mo? Okay. Nung tinanong ako na, teacher, tama ba na i-mute yung mga estudyante? Kasi ingay nila hindi magkarinigan kapag lahat nagsasalita o lahat naka-unmute. Oo nga naman, no? Hindi nga talaga magkakarinigan pagka ganun. Pero yung value ko, yung value system ko tells me, sa totoong buhay ba, kaya ko ba gawin yun? Kaya ko ba i-mute yung mga estudyante na nagsasalita habang nagsasalita sila? Hindi, di ba? Hindi siya realistic. So, kailangan ipapractice natin yung skill na realistic. Or yung pag-mute at unmute, ituturo natin yun sa kanila. It's a digital citizenship skill. It is a social skill. So, tinuturo yan sa kanila. Kasama na po yan dapat sa curriculum na ginagawa natin. Yung how to comment using the chat box. Fine motor skills are developed using typing, handwriting, di ba? Lalo na yung mga 8 years old and below, kailangan nagsusulat sila sa papel, tapos papakita nila sa teacher, sa camera, yung sinulat nila. Okay? Using the mouse, kung merong mouse na gumagamit, using manipulative movables on the screen, yung mga click and drag, and transferring new skills to various subjects like taking virtual tours kasi hindi tayo makapag-field trip ngayon. Pero ang maganda ngayon, pwede mo na sila dalhin kahit anong bahagi ng mundo. No? We have to make sure though that as parents, we are moving at the pace of learning of our children. No? Hindi natin pwede i-expect na na lahat kaya nila gawin. No? Kung kunwari, nag-over kayo sa lesson sa isang subject, okay lang yun. Basta make sure that you focus on things that they like to do. Okay? Subjects that they like to do. So, positive reinforcement kasi yan. So, iba na yung itsura ng learning from home ngayon kasi may online setting, tapos may modular setting, na yung modular, mas kinakailangan ng may magulang dyan. Pero sa online, kapag bata pa, or especially for special learners, kinakailangan merong adult supervision pa rin na kailangan. So, yung communication ni parent at ni teacher when it comes to scheduling, importante yon. Okay. So, next slide, please. So, meron kami sa bahay routines na for learning science, reading and writing, math, sensory activities, and so on. Okay. Ngayon, ang special learners natin, ang nawawala kasi is yung movement and sensory experiences. They need that, no? So, paano natin to i-replace? Next slide, please. Yung mga mahilig mag-order ng mga kung ano-ano online. Next slide, please. Yan. Yung mga bubble wrap na yan, gamitin natin sa bahay para sa sensory play activities. You can use it to finger paint or you can use it as a walking trackpad, hugging, and breathing exercises. These are important for children to release energy, no? Simple objects like Play-Doh, clay, kung wala naman yan, kahit ano yung pwede nilang imasa, even mud, no? Actually, mas gusto ko pa nga yung soil, yung lupa, tapos babasain ng kaunti at yun yung gagamitin na sensory play activity. Okay. Kahit anong material ang available, so teacher, hindi natin kailangan pabilhin yung parents nito. Tignan nyo kung ano yung available sa bahay nila and transform it, convert it into sensory activities for the special learners. Okay? Okay. So, ang isa pang kinakailangan when we look at learning from home, ito mahalaga for parents naman. Next slide, please. Is to take long breaks, no? Hindi kinakailangan na sunod-sunod yung schedule nyo na para kayong drill sergeant ng tinetherapy nyo yung anak nyo na magkakasunod, no? So, take long breaks. To a child, love is spelled as T-I-M-E. So, spending time with the child is showing them love, showing them your love. And as parents, ako nga, sabi ko, yung 20 minutes a day of reading a story to a child na walang distraction, ha? Yung you are into the activity yourself, that's perfect. Okay, that's quality time that you are giving. That's a piece of yourself. Okay. Now, teachers, what do we recommend? Anong pwedeng, kasi sinasabi ng parents, naku teacher, ang hirap ng walang therapy. Hindi mo talaga makakope yung anak ko ng walang therapy. Hirap na hirap kami sa bahay. Ganyan, di ba? Yan yung mga naririnig natin. Tama ba ako? Yun ba yung naririnig nyo from the parents? Are you getting that kind of feedback? So, let's show them that they are able, no? Let's give them recommendations. That's gonna be our role right now. Kasi tayo yung nakakaalam, tayo yung may empirical knowledge, research about what works with special learners or what works with neurodiverse kids. Then we have to give them the resources, no? Kung kinakailangan mag-search tayo online para sa resources na pwede natin ibigay sa parents, let's do it. Okay, next slide please. What can you recommend? Halimbawa, preschoolers. You can model language, pretend play. Yung maglaro lang kayo sa labas ng platu-platuhan or kunwari, restaurant, maglalaro kayo, bahay-bahayan, yan. That's language modeling. Next slide, please. You are also, halimbawa, mas matanda yung bata. Kunwari, magluluto kayo, o kaya pupunta kayo sa bakuran, mag-explore kayo ng mga halaman, no? Or iba-ibang klase ng puno. Alamin ninyo kung anong klase yung puno na meron kayo malapit. Games, no? Makikipaglaro. And pagtanong ng mga tanong sa bata na hindi kinakailangan, dapat conversational, hindi kinakailangan na parang tinetest nyo sila at pag nagkamali sila ay mag-punishment na kasama. Hindi po ganun ang therapy. Next slide. Next, please. Yung mas matanda naman, they can work on their language skills. Cooking, it's a life skill. Lagi yan, no? Makakatulong. Or watching a movie together, no? And then pag-uusapan nyo kung ano yung pinanood. Kahit yung short videos lang na importanteng pinag-uusapan yung pinanood. Para magkaroon ng halaga ang mga pinapanood ng mga bata sa TV or kahit saan, kinailangan pinoproseso ito, lalo na for our neurodiverse kids. Okay? Kasi baka mali yung interpretation nila of the information that they got sa pinanood nila. So, importante na may reminder na ganoon. Yung mga mas bata, kailangan din na sumusunod tayo sa appropriate screen time. Hindi porket maliit ang cellphone, okay lang na iwanan sila with a cellphone ng mas mahaba sa 2 oras sa isang araw, lalo na kung ang bata ay 8 years old and below. So kinakailangan i-limit yung screen time to 2 hours a day for kids 8 years old and below, because longer than that, it will affect them in the long run. Diba? In the future, visual, pinaka-obvious yung eyesight. No? Ako nga, tumaas yung grade ko throughout the year. Baka sabihin nyo, Teacher Tin, baka tumatanda ka lang. Totoo naman din yun. Pero dahil nadagdagan yung screen time ko, di ba? Yun, isa pang dahilan yun. Okay, next slide please. Consistency is key. No, ito ang pinaka-importante. Consistency provides a feeling of security for our kids with neurodiversities. So, they should know what to expect. Kapag Monday, ito ang mangyayari. Pag Tuesday, ganito ang mangyayari. Kapag ganitong oras, ito ang mangyayari. Kung gusto nyong iwasan yung mga tantrum sa bahay, yung pagwawala, yun ang kailangan nyo gawin. Ngayon, kung consistent kayo sa routine, tapos nun, meron pa ring behavioral challenges na nangyayari, gaya ng dinescribe ni Lance kanina, may ibang ibig sabihin yon. Kids na hindi communicative, yung hindi masyado verbal, lumalabas yung stress nila through behaviors, no? Hindi nila kasi kaya sabihin na, I'm feeling stressed, di ba? Hindi nila kaya sabihin yon. So, ang gagawin nila, pwede hindi sila makatulog sa gabi, hindi sila makakain, or yung dating oras na ginagawa nila, iba na yung ginagawa nila. May change in behavior. So, that's a signal to you na may nasa-stress yung bata. Okay? So, we have to read the cues. But it's important to be consistent so that we can determine if it is due to inconsistency or is it due to a stressor that is causing the behavior problem. Okay? Clear? Okay. Dami ko sinabi. Ha? Baka na-overwhelm kayo. Okay. Pa-thumbs up naman kung okay pa kayo. Okay. Kasi alam ko, ang dami natin kailangan tandaan, ang dami natin kailangan pag-usapan pa, pag-nilay-nilayan to make things work. Diba, no? Ganun talaga. Pero I want you to remember this, no? Next slide, please. Melanie Bennett is a parent of a child with autism, and sabi nga niya, in a home where grief is fresh and patience has long worn thin, making it through another day is often heroic in itself. So let's encourage our parents, no? This will be our encouragement to our parents na hindi mo kailangan gawin lahat ng sinabi ni Teacher Tin. Isa-isa lang. Okay? Try mo lang, isa-isa lang. Hindi kailangan lahat at hindi kailangan lahat sabay-sabay. Pero try mo lang, isa-isa lang. And then, just getting through another day, okay ka na, buhay ka pa. Next slide, please. So, teachers, what can we do? In summary, first, we assess accommodations. And accommodations will depend on the resources that are available to the students. Okay? Kung ano yung setup nila sa bahay nila, leave no room for judgment. Okay? So, kung yung mga strategies na sinabi ni Sir Lance kanina, audio recording, captioning, gamitin nyo yun, no? Gamitin natin yung tools kasi that's making education equitable. And when doing so, you are making it just. Okay? So, accommodations are really important. Next slide, please. Modify curriculum and instruction. So, in a remote setting, iba yung environment, di ba? So, kinakailangan a-adjust nyo yung yung learning activity sheets nyo. Adjust nyo yon, no? Kung halimbawa, writing is difficult, ipa-drawing nyo. Kasi kung may physical disability, hindi niya mara-write. Okay, may fine motor problem, hindi niya kayang isulat. Find another way for that child to express the knowledge that you are testing and then do it in a different way. Modify. Yan ang mantra natin. Okay? Tandaan natin, accommodate and modify. Lastly, ito yung favorite ko, project-based learning. Studies show that students with neurodiversities learn more by using research and analysis to complete a project. Engage the students in a project. Kasi pag nag-project work kayo, halimbawa, obsessed yung bata sa Star Wars. Kunwari lang. Or sa BTS. May ganun ba? Kunwari, may mga magulang nga kung obsessed sa BTS di ba? May mga nanay. So, obsessed siya sa BTS, gamitin yung project si BTS. Gagawa siya ng album ng portfolio ni BTS. Kailangan niyang i-drawing, na-check niyo yung fine motor skill. Kailangan niya magsulat ng descriptions, nag-check kayo ng grammar, nag-check kayo ng literacy skills. Kailangan niya magbasa ng information tungkol sa bawat miyembro ng BTS, nagbasa siya. So, nandun ang literacy skills. Kailangan niyang alamin kung anong age sila nag-start, kailan sila naging sikat, yung timeline nila, nag-math na kayo, algebra pa nga yun di ba? So, and it's a social studies activity kasi galing silang Korea. Nasaan ang Korea? May North at South pala. Matuturo nyo yon. Nasaan siya sa globe? Nag-social studies kayo. So, yun ang nangyari. In project-based learning, you use the interest of the child to target the skills that you are actually wanting to attain for the student. Okay? Yan. Kayang-kaya, di ba? Okay, remember our airplane. Last word I'll leave you with is this. No? Whatever small step you take is already a step towards progress. So, keep taking that step. Buo na natin yung plane and we are flying it together. Thanks everyone for listening and I hope nakatulong kahit papaano.
Ayan. Thank you po, Teacher Ten. Ayun. So,
napakasiksik na naman po na discussion. Tuwan-tuwa na naman po yung ating mga commenters sa ating chat box. So, I think before we move on to our next one, baka po may takeaways po kayo, Ma'am Rubilin and Ms. Zari.
Yes,
Ms.
for me
Rubilin?
po, yes, parent and teacher involvement po and partnership is really vital. Hindi siya pwedeng i-separate po. Ayun.
Ayan. So, what stands out naman to me po from your discussion po was the part to remind us that it is really important talaga yung self-care and to pause. Though I haven't experienced the overwhelming responsibility of a parent yet, it still applies to me as someone who is trying to survive sa situation natin ngayon, lalo na po sa part ng emotional health. Right, Teacher Mika? How about you?
Ayan. Sa akin naman, na-realize ko na yung mga skills or core values kanina na naka-apply natin sa teachers, yung adaptable, dapat resilient, dapat resourceful, mga parents dapat ganun din yung core values and skills nila. So, pareho tayo, mag-work tayo together like what Ma'am Rubilin said. So, may collaboration between our parents and our teachers. Ayan. So, to give more takeaways, tawagin naman po natin ang ating manager from Microsoft. I think we have here Miss Clarissa. Ayan, so balik po natin si Miss Isang.
Ayan.
Po.
Welcome back po.
Welcome.
Good morning again. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes po.
Thank you so much, Teacher Tin, and to Sir Lance for sharing your all with us. I mentioned earlier naman, the way to sustain this and to move forward with this is to pass on the knowledge to our other teachers and school leaders. I clearly recall nung nag-umpisa ang pandemic, I was invited also by DepEd and some of our industry partners to really share, as a parent, how am I coping with the pandemic, ano yung mga ways and means namin dito sa bahay, because everything was being done online until today. I just realized, I thought at that time I was doing things perfectly. But then hearing and attending all these sessions, and not just today's sessions, pati yung session the past few weeks na ginawa ng DepEd EdTech unit and the other online trainings that I've signed up for, there's really so much to learn. There's really so much to learn from the community, from the resources available, and there's also a lot to unlearn that I thought I was doing right and properly. It's really also a matter of having a paradigm shift and being humble, open, and willing to embrace these concepts. Kasi a lot of times, lalo na as adults, I will speak for myself. I know I'm natural at things when it comes to caring for children, caring for my family, and for teachers caring for the students. But we should also look at the fact that there are framework and concepts na pwede pala nating matutunan tsaka gagawin into action, so that nakikita natin ito pala yung tamang proseso kung paano i-address yung mga bagay na akala natin nandun or akala natin wala. When it comes to needs of children, there are actually needs that are visible. So tulad nga ng sinabi kanina ni Sir Lance, the shift should focus to we shift the focus to the disability so that the environment can look at the disability and adjust to it. If I remember it right, something around those lines, right? So tama yon kasi hindi nga sila yung mag-a-adjust eh. Diba? And being inclusive and making learning accessible is everybody's business. It's not a by the way thing. Now, there are also needs that are invisible. And I picked it up from Teacher Tin when she said, we teach the way our students learn. And it's not the other way around. I remember, there was a time when my boys, they're active, boys, my children. I don't understand kung bakit kapag nag-aaral kami at kailangan niya akong sagutin, I really get distracted because my son has to walk around the house. I felt like I'm being disrespected kasi lakad siya ng lakad. Pero after a while, masasabi niya yung sagot niya sa akin. Bakit ganon? Or bakit paminsan may drama kami na para magawa niya yung assignment niya, dinadala ko siya sa park, may baon kami, and then all of a sudden, in 30 minutes na nasa park kami, everything na kailangan kong ituro in 3 hours, sa loob ng 30 minutes when he was younger, nakukuha niya, nami-memorize niya, tapos may games kami, di ba? I mean, then I realized, oo, kasi hindi naman lahat ng bata gustong nakaupo lang or nakikinig. And I recall, nung bata ba ako, nag-e-enjoy ako noon na may teacher, tas talagang 8 hours nakaganyan lang kami, tatayo lang kami pag recess or magawa niya. So, things have really changed. And these are cues and signs na as adult and as teachers, hindi natin siya pwedeng ibaon at sabihin, hindi, kasi dati naman hindi tayo ganyan. Bakit yung mga bata ngayon, nag-iiba na sila? So, it's also caring enough and going beyond our duty, whether I am speaking to our educators or tayo as partners of DepEd, caring enough to see, meron ba akong kailangan makita sa estudyante ko na baka may ganon, and what are the tools that I need to assess so that I could address the requirements or the needs of my learner. So, having listened and having learned newer things from Sir Lance and Teacher Tin today, ini-integrate ko siya sa kung anong ginagawa ng Microsoft because hindi naman education institution si Microsoft, but I know for sure we are a partner of the education institutions and the Department of Education pagdating sa pagbigay ng accessible and inclusive learning environment sa ating mga bata. At the core of it all, I will go back to what I talked about earlier on. At the core of it all is really empathy. I couldn't, parang hindi ko siya, paulit-ulit ko siyang sasabihin in all our presentations. It's really empathy. The digital world that we have today, which we are really embracing because that's how we learn, that's how we communicate now, that's how we do our business, that's how we talk to others, right? It's through digital for now. I feel that as Microsoft, patuloy kaming nagtuturo sa mga 23 million students and 900,000 teachers in DepEd on how to acquire these digital skills, ha? Because we say nga, in the future, karamihan talaga ng lahat ng skills na hahanapin sa mga graduates are ICT related. But I also feel and believe in Microsoft also, all the more we need to be connected with others. All the more we have to be connected with our emotions and our spirituality. Because if we take that thing out of the equation, everything will just be mechanical and very technology-centric. Hindi siya learner-centric, hindi niya ina-address yung kailangan ng teachers. And so, when Teacher Tin talked about, her dream is, really changing the world, actually, yeah, it's, very dreamer, diba? And for me, that's really ambitious. But is it impossible? It's not impossible. Maraming salamat sa ating mga teachers and to Teacher Tin and to Teacher Lance. At marami tayong tulad nila ngayon, who continue to look at different ways and help other teachers understand this too, to make the world more inclusive. And changing the world, like I said, is not impossible. It's hard. We are all struggling, but it's not impossible. And we are only able to do that one student at a time, one classroom at a time, not alone, but together as partners. So thank you again, Teacher Tin, Ms. Lance, and again to DepEd at Tech Unit for putting this together and for Adventist Technologies. Now, I look forward to the next speaker because dito naman papasok yung, okay, may concepts tayo, may framework tayo, ito yung tinuro sa atin. Nasaan yung tools ko? Parang how can we use these tools that are being made available to us? We're not, because it's part of DepEd's technology. Access ninyo to lahat. Lahat kayo may right to access these technologies, all teachers and students. So I look forward to hearing from our next speakers on these tools. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you po. We appreciate your 2 cents, Miss Clarissa Segusmundo. And we hope to have you again, Miss Canon. Until next time po. Salamat na marami po. And for our last segment for this morning, syempre hindi natin kakalimutan ng tagapaghatid ng magandang balita, a familiar face across Microsoft Tech Talks. Here's Miss Mardy Quaresma, Master Trainer of Adventist Technologies.
Ayan.
Hello.
Hello po.
Hello, Teacher Rubelin, Teacher Mika, and Teacher Zari. So, mabilisan lang to para sa ating mga Microsoft Digit Tools for this week. Lalong-lalo na napaka-interesting at madami po tayong natutunan about inclusion and accessible learning. So, syempre, hindi po magpapahuli ang Microsoft dahil talaga namang sinusuportahan nila ang ating mga teachers and ating students, lalong-lalo na sa ating teaching and learning. Sabi nga po natin, inclusion, no one should be left behind. So, ito po sa ating Microsoft Educator Center na pwedeng-pwede po natin i-access basta i-login lang po natin ang ating mga Microsoft accounts, Outlook accounts, at pwede po nating i-search dito itong course, Accessibility, Special Education and Online Learning, Supporting Equity in a Remote Learning Environment. So, dito may mga tools po tayong matututunan na included sa ating Windows 10 na software and sa ating Office 365, like po yung mga accessibility checker, kung saan pag kunyari may gumagawa tayo sa Word, PowerPoint, or Excel, talagang matutulungan tayo para kung paano mas ma-improve yung readability ng ating mga documents. And also, meron din po tayong immersive reader na nakakatulong para naman sa ating mga learners to improve reading and comprehension. And yung meron din po tayong tinatawag ngayon na Microsoft Editor kung saan isa siyang assistant para sa atin para mas mapabuti at mas mapaganda ang ating English grammar and writing. So, ipapakita ko lang po sa inyo ng sobrang dali. Gagaya po ng mga shinare ni Miss Tin, ni Miss Cannon, and ni Mr. Lance Cabigas, yung ating mga different learning needs, yung diversity of needs, yung pwede siya maging learning, pwede siya maging visual, hearing, mobility, neurodiversity, and mental health. So dito, may mga tools na may papakita po sa atin, depende po sa learning need na ating ina-address. So katulad nga po ng sinabi ko kanina, yung mga immersive reader, math assistant, and dictation. At definitely, pagkatapos nyo pong mabasa yung mga videos, mapanood yung mga videos and yung mga learning content po sa ating course, meron ding mga teacher tips na talaga naman pong additional teacher tips aside po dun sa mga ibinigay ni Sir Lance and ni Miss Cannon kung paano po natin mas mapapabuti at mas magiging inclusive and accessible ang ating online learning. So ayan, marami po ditong information na talagang magagamit nyo sa inyong pagtuturo, lalong-lalo na po ngayon sa panahon na lahat ay nasa virtual world at lahat ay online ang pagtuturo. So, ayun lang naman po. Again, just visit Microsoft Educator Center at ang title po ng course natin ay Accessibility, Special Education, and Online Learning, Supporting Equity in a Remote Learning Environment. So, tiyak na mas marami po kayong mas matututunan dito at mas marami pa po kayong malalaman tungkol po sa ating online learning. So, Miss Mika, Teacher Zari, and Teacher Rubelin, back to you po.
Miss Mardy. O yan, so sabi nga po ni Miss Mardy, i-access niyo lang po yung ating Microsoft Educator Center para makita niyo po yung ating course. Alright? Yung binanggit po niya na course natin about accessibility and inclusive learning. So yan. So gusto po natin ulit na tawagin ang ating mga speakers para po sa awarding po ng ating certificate to be led by Teacher Rubilin.
Ayan, so yung mga speakers po natin, we are so grateful po na nakasama kayo this morning. So in behalf po of Department of Education, ICTS, ETU, ito po yung mga token po namin this morning. So let me read a citation. Republika ng Pilipinas, Department of Education, Information and Communications Technology Services, DepEd Complex, Meralco Avenue, Pasig City, Certificate of Appreciation is presented to Lance Vincent Cabigas of E-Learning Designer Monash University for sharing his valuable knowledge as guest speaker during TechTalks for All, Strengthening Inclusive Education for Everyone, Everywhere webinar conducted by the ICTS Educational Technology Unit on April 24, 2021. Given this 24th day of April 2021 in DepEd Central Office, Meralco Avenue, Pasig City, Philippines. In the OUA memo 0004210032, signed by our head in ICTS ETU, Mark Anthony C.C., and also signed by Director 4 of ICTS, Sir Abraham Y.C. Abanil, and Undersecretary for Administration, Alain Delby Pasqua. Congratulations po, Sir Lance Vincent Cabigas. Thank you very much. And with the same citation, this certificate of appreciation is also given to Miss Christine V. Cannon. Ayan, thank you very much po. And of course, we have Miss Mardy Quaresma of Adantis Technologies Incorporated. So once again, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Yan, thank you po. Congratulations po sa ating mga speakers. Ayan, sana po sa susunod ma-invite po namin kayo ulit.
Okay, once again, hands off po and cheers to our speakers today sa pagbibigay ng kanilang oras at expertise.
Okay, so I think si Ms. Rubilin, she will give us instructions po for our survey and our course po.
Ayan po, para po marinig po namin yung mga kaisipan nyo po, we need your feedback. Sagutan nyo lang po yung forms natin. Nakikita nyo dyan sa baba. Ayan, yung https://tinyurl.com/techtalks11. Yan. Actually, yan lagi yung ano natin, no, yung link. Ang naiba lang yung TechTalks 11 kasi last week TechTalks 10 tayo. Pakisagutan po yan. So, while waiting po sa mga sumasagot dyan, kasi importante po talaga yung survey kasi dyan po namin makikita kung ano naman yung susunod na ibibigay naming topics po sa inyo. Hindi ba, Teacher Sari at Teacher Mika?
Tama po
Ayun.
kayo. Sa susunod na Sabado muli, may mga bago educators and professionals na naman po tayo makikilala. So, hope to see you all again and invite others to listen and learn with us. Laging tandaan, we never stop learning even you are not aware of it. At ang education is for all, for everyone. Until next time po.
Ayan. So, again, thank you very much sa lahat po. Ayan.
Thank you
Have a
po.
great day. See you this 1 o'clock sa my Tech Talk po.
Bye po! Enjoy your
Cognizant to the needs of our learners, parents, and teachers, the Department of Education provided us with powerful tools for productivity that will allow us to foster critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, communication and collaboration skills to be compassionate, responsible global citizens. Join us and discover new ideas in our series of professional development training program with the ICTS EdTech Unit and Microsoft Education Philippines. Together, we will equip our learners and empower our fellow educators for a dynamic future. Para sa bata, para sa bayan, at para sa guro. Sulong Edukalidad.